Chapter 263. Zixiao, who do you think he looks like? After leaving Charles Bridge, Renbaqian turned around and asked the Empress. He was thinking about the 7th prince of Great Xia. He didn't know how that guy was doing. If he killed him, would he become stronger? It was a pity that the prince of Great Xia wasn't that easy to kill. What he didn't know was that the 7th prince's head had already been reduced to bones. It was the evening before he broke through the visualization of water. Hua Sanlu, the Empress said faintly. That person reminded her of Hua Sanlu as he looked like him. However, she understood what he said. Otherwise, she would have smacked him to death. The 5th most powerful expert in the world. Renbaqian was surprised. He had never seen Hua Sanlu before and didn't know if Shindu looked the same as him. Maybe they just looked alike. If they looked exactly the same, then it would be more interesting. He asked the Empress what was on his mind. Do they look alike? The Empress shook her head slightly, just a little. Renbaqian nodded. It was normal to have people who looked alike. However, the nation wanted to talk to him? Interesting. I wonder what the nation knows. They probably don't know that I can transmigrate. In that case, they probably know about the laboratory and want to know where I got it. Do I have any other things? This possibility is quite high. I have a lot of good things. It's not impossible to cooperate with the nation. Just like that longevity saber, it's very magical but not very useful. Renbaqian was originally prepared to build a physical chemistry laboratory in the future. Cooperating with the nation would save him a lot of trouble. However, he still had to put on airs. Climbing up a pole wasn't a business deal. At the thought of this, he relaxed and continued to tour the old city of Prague with the Empress. They stopped for a while under the tower of Charles Bridge and went straight to the legendary old square of Prague. I saw them, but the mission failed. Shendu climbed out of the water and used the phone of his companion who wasn't thrown into the water to make a call. What happened? The person on the other side of the phone asked in a deep voice. I don't know, they said they hate me. Shendu gritted his teeth when he said this. He didn't expect that he, who was loved by everyone, would have such a day. The person on the other side of the phone was silent for a while before comforting him. Don't worry, you aren't RMB. Not everyone likes you. Follow them first, the first group will be there soon. Shindu's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Why do I feel like there's something wrong with your words? There wasn't any conflict, right? The person on the other side asked again. Shindu's face darkened even further. There was no conflict. They just said that they hated me and threw me into the Vltava River. From your voice, it sounds like you're fine. Don't get into a conflict with them. Number 2 is still alright, but I'm afraid that number 1 is somewhat inhuman. This was the code name given by the department. Number 2 was Renbaqian, and number 1 was Qi Zixiao. After all, Renbaqian used to be an ordinary person. Everything changed after Qi Zixiao appeared by his side. Qi Zixiao was the key. Renbaqian and the Empress walked around Prague Square for a long time. There were white pigeons flying all around, and they could see couples holding hands and hugging each other everywhere. Renbaqian lowered his head and looked at the Empress's hand. Then he looked at his left hand, which was still swollen. In the end, he dispelled that thought. When the two of them were walking around the square, they heard the melodious sound of a bell. They followed the sound and ran to the astronomical clock. I want this. The Empress pointed at the astronomical clock after sizing it up for a long time. Renbaqian knew that the Empress didn't want this clock, but wanted to build a similar clock tower in Lon City. It was indeed much more convenient to have a clock. There was no need to look at the sky to estimate the time. When it was cloudy and raining, the sun couldn't be seen and there was no accurate time. Okay. Renbaqian nodded. It shouldn't be difficult to make such a clock. The main thing was to find someone to make the design. Some of the parts that couldn't be made in Dayo could also be made on Earth. After the glass was made, he would sell the old clock and earn a lot of money. In the end, there were too many things that could be used to make money. Sometimes Renbaqian didn't know what to choose. Even the simplest nail clippers could be sold for a lot of money. Needles could also be used. Although Dayo mostly used bone needles, many animal bones that couldn't be found on Earth were very tough after being ground into needles. However, they could still be sold to other countries for a lot of money. In particular, needles were small in size. If a caravan could bring a lot of them, the profits would definitely not be low. After the concave mirror was made, he would specially organize a caravan and carefully prepare some goods. Those countries had been making money in Dayo for so many years, and it was time for them to spit out some of it. They walked and strolled along the way. Very soon, the sky turned dark. After dinner, they strolled along the streets of the old city. Suddenly, a bright flame shone in the sky. Fireworks? Renbachien looked up and was slightly surprised, following which, a smile appeared on his face. At this moment, fireworks were being set off on a small boat in the river downstream of Charlie Bridge. There were always all kinds of surprises in this romantic city. The Empress was even more surprised than Renbachien. This was the first time she saw fireworks. The flowers in the sky made her eyes shine with a different light. The light from the fireworks shone on their faces, making them bright and dark at times. Not far away, there was a couple hugging each other and shouting in surprise. Renbachien was infected by this atmosphere. He made up his mind and used his pig-trotter-like hand to grab the Empress's palm. There wasn't the expected paw. Renbachien grabbed it firmly and a slender and soft palm fell into his palm. Renbachien turned his head to look at the Empress, but she raised her head to look at the fireworks. However, her eyes were a little wandering and her ears were a little hot. "You are the most beautiful treasure that heaven has given to this world," Renbachien whispered in her ear. The Empress's ears turned even redder. Renbachien sniffed the fragrance from the Empress's body and felt the softness and warmth of her hand. A kind of satisfaction and happiness filled his heart, making it full of warmth. The fireworks ended very quickly. After all, it was a private fireworks display and wouldn't last for half an hour. When the two of them stood there for a few minutes and still didn't see the fireworks rise, Renbachien knew that the fireworks had ended. It was a little regretful. It would be better if this moment could last a little longer. However, he didn't let go. He held the Empress's hand all along and pulled her up. Not far behind the two of them, there were 3 people. 2 of them were a couple, and the other was a single dog. He looked at the couples on the street with a face full of resentment. Renbachien smiled as he walked past. He listened to the joyful shouts coming from behind him, and felt the surging affection between the two of them. Although the fireworks were gone, the warmth between the two of them was still there. He still hoped that the street would be longer, so that they could walk a little longer. The Empress lowered her head slightly as if she was counting the stones on the ground. "Sorry to disturb the two of you." 3 people in front stopped the two of them. The Water Empress raised her head. Her eyes were filled with a bone-chilling coldness. It only took an instant for her to go from warmth to coldness. The Empress's hand left Renbachien's pig-trotter. Feeling the Empress's hand being pulled away from his palm, Renbachien's eyes widened, and he flew into a rage. "You know that I'm disturbing you, yet you still come out." His right hand reached behind his waist, pulled out his gun and fired. His face was filled with resentment. "How long has it been? Huh. After such a long time. I've finally managed to hold her hand and nurture our relationship. How dare you come out to disturb me? You're apologizing to me? If apologies were useful, why would we need the police? Why would he need a gun?" The 3 of them were shocked by Renbachien's actions. They hurriedly ran to the side and broke the window of the house next to them. Bang! 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 3 consecutive gunshots rang out, and the stone chips on the ground flew everywhere. Renbachien gritted his teeth and threw the revolver that he had snatched from them through the window. Chapter 264. 1. When Ho Yong and the other 2 came out of the house, the 2 people outside had already disappeared. They are simply too vile, too excessive, too vicious. How could the higher-ups negotiate with such people? Cece gritted her teeth as glass shards fell from her body. "It's not like you haven't read the information." Ho Yong was also angry, but he suppressed it because he knew that this was a serious matter. Thinking about the information she had read these days, Cece couldn't vent her anger anymore. The woman in the information was simply inhuman. They were shooting at the ground and didn't really want to do anything to you. Shindu and the other 2 walked out from the side. Shindu was in a good mood. At least he said a few words, and these 3 people were worse off than him. He immediately felt better. Humph. Ho Yong and the other 2 snorted. These 2 people had committed a total of 6 cases in our nation, and about 20 people had died. What they did in China was even more outrageous. The other party had already taken out their guns, and the 3 of them didn't dare to bet on whether they would shoot them or not. But you guys really deserve to be single. Shindu teased. They are having a sweet time there, but you guys were in such a hurry to disturb them. I already told you to wait a little longer, but you guys didn't believe me. Now that you have lost everything, I don't know when we will be able to stop them again. Stop making sarcastic remarks. Weren't you thrown into the river too? Ho Yong scolded. Being thrown into the river by such a beauty might be a blessing. It's better than being shot. Shindu didn't seem to care. Ho Yong's face turned black. Are you trying to disgust us? Group leader Shen, you must tell us when you and Lu Tong get married. We will give you our blessings, Cici said. Hearing this, Shindu's face turned black as well. That damn bastard was too vicious. I will add a chicken drumstick for you tonight. Ho Yong gave Cici an admiring look. Aren't you going back? The Empress asked casually as she looked at the colorful city under the night sky. She was a little surprised when he opened fire just now. In fact, she already understood what that person on the bridge said in the afternoon. Otherwise, she would have killed him with a slap. You look like someone I hate, so I'll kill you. This logic was valid in the Empress's mind. However, the Empress still remembered that Rinpochian had a wronged look on his face when he first escaped. She felt that he probably still wanted to go back. Of course, we have to go back, Rinpochian said as he looked down. At this time, the 2 of them were in the astronomical clock tower. Sometimes, the 2 of them would stay in the hotel for a night. Of course, they wouldn't go through the front desk. It was indeed troublesome to not have a passport, but Rinpochian had yet to find a suitable person to make 2 passports. At this time, looking at the colorful city under the night sky from the tower, there were still some people wandering in the square below. After hearing Rinpochian's reply, the Empress didn't say anything else. Rinpochian turned his head and looked at the Empress with an expression that said, "Why don't you ask? I'll tell you if you ask." Unfortunately, the Empress didn't even look at him. Rinpochian held back for a long time. In the end, his face turned from one of anticipation to one of bitterness. Sure enough, it was impossible to wait for the Empress to play the role of a sidekick. However, he couldn't see the smile in the Empress's eyes. We definitely have to go back. After all, we're familiar with the place and it's more convenient for us to do anything. However, even though the nation wants to cooperate with us on certain things, the nation is made up of people, and people's thoughts are the most unreliable. If we go back like this, what if people think that we're easy to bully? What if someone points at us and says this and that every day, and they feel that it's only right? What should we do then? We can't possibly go on a killing spree or run away again, right? If that happens, the other party won't be able to tolerate it. Therefore, we have to put on airs first. It's better to get what we can't get. This way, after we have a good talk with the other party will scrutinize us carefully, and it will save us a lot of trouble in the future. Just like the Empress, Rinpochian turned his head and looked at the plaza outside as he spoke unhurriedly. He was just an ordinary person with good stuff in his hands. He really didn't want to go back to the city and be in constant trouble. At that time, he couldn't just cause a ruckus at the slightest provocation. The Empress thought about his words. There were too many twists and turns, and she felt that it was too troublesome. If someone tried to take advantage of her, she could just slap them to death. If someone came looking for trouble, she could just slap them to death. If someone wasn't pleasing to the eye, she could just slap them to death. There was no need to be so troublesome. The 2 of them stood there for a long time before Rinpochian said, "Let's go back." The Empress grabbed his wrist, and the 2 of them disappeared from the tower. On the 2nd and 3rd day, the 2 groups discovered that the 2 of them had disappeared again. However, everyone was already used to it. They would always disappear for 8 to 15 days, and then reappear for 3 to 5 days. Many people were curious about what they did when they disappeared. Hiding their tracks? That was impossible. It would be inconceivable if the two of them could hide their tracks. But if they weren't hiding their tracks, what were they doing? At the same time, a certain department in the country invited some people to hold a special meeting. Previously, they thought that by finding the two of them, they would be able to achieve their goal. After all, Runbachian was still a little red flower. Through some forums, they found some of his previous statements, and it showed that he had trust and a good impression of the country. However, they didn't expect the two groups to actually fail. The other party even pulled out their guns without any hesitation. Even though they only shot at the ground, this also explained some problems. After this meeting, with the help of some people, a group of psychologists, criminologists, and other people was formed to study the thoughts of the two of them. Runbachian thought that the country was coveting the things in his hands because of the laboratory. In fact, it was only because of a video and some things found at the scene of the Jin family's death that made some people realize that there was a superhuman like the Empress in this world. A superhuman represented too many things, such as the direction of human evolution, super soldiers, and many more. Then they discovered some of the things that the laboratory was researching. The two of them became more important in the eyes of the country. In this newly formed group, they made various hypotheses about the disappearance of the two of them, such as the remains of a prehistoric civilization, an alien spaceship, a legendary paradise, or hibernation. Hibernation was proposed by a biologist. He felt that, according to some of the information, the strength that the Empress displayed was completely unbearable for humans. Therefore, she had to hibernate every once in a while to recover her body. The Empress sat in the seat of honor, looking indifferent and dignified. Not far away sat Runbachian, and the head of the Public Security Bureau, Tai Yan. Two people stood in front of Yangxin Palace Hall. One was Ning Kaichen, the other was Zhu Qingjun. At this moment, even though Zhu Qingjuan's face was pale, he looked indifferent and had completely disregarded life and death. Neither he nor Ning Kaichen felt that he could return alive. "What do you want?" The Empress looked at Ning Kaichen and asked. Ning Kaichen couldn't have specially sent Runbachian over out of kindness. Ning Kaichen smiled shyly. "Actually, I don't want anything. After all, Deputy Prefect Run and I hit it off at first sight. However, my spirit sword Green Pearl was seriously damaged this time, and I need some materials to repair it. It would be great if the Empress of Dayo could give me a handful of cloud crystals, or an appropriate amount of white dragon grass and stone marrow." Tai Yan's eyes were like knives as he stared at Ning Kaichen. Cloud crystals were considered rare treasures, and a handful of them could be exchanged for a city. Even though white dragon grass and stone marrow weren't as precious as cloud crystals, they were still very valuable. "You are really demanding an exorbitant price. You actually want to sell this person for the price of a city. I can't give you cloud crystals, but I will get someone to send you the white dragon grass and stone marrow later," the Empress said. Since someone had delivered the information that she wanted, she wouldn't be stingy with her rewards. As for whether it was worth it or not, according to the words in the television series that day, it didn't matter if it was worth it or not. It only depended on whether one wanted it or not. Soon after, Ning Kaichen was brought away. "Your Majesty, it's my fault." Tai Yan stood up and apologized. "You can collect your salary for 3 months. The Empress waved her hand. "As for this person, I will leave his corpse intact and bury him somewhere outside the city." The Empress's gaze drifted across Zhu Qingjuan's body, without a trace of emotion. Leaving his corpse intact was already on account of him telling her everything. "Your Majesty," Runbachian suddenly called out. "What's the matter?" The Empress looked at Runbachian with a gentler gaze. "I would like to ask you a few questions." Runbachian stood up and saw the Empress nodding. He then turned around and asked, "Since the Lien family knows that they have been exposed, will they still stay there?" In his heart, nothing was more important than his life, especially things like wealth and status. If he died, he would lose everything. What about the Lien family? In order to suppress this matter, they didn't even hesitate to kill people to keep their mouths shut. What would they do now? Ning Kaichen had been here for a month. If they sent people over, they would have already run away. Lien Qiji should be there, and most of them won't leave either. After all, The Lien family is located in the hinterland of Great Xia. I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to send people there. However, they should arrange for a small number of young and talented people to leave and hide first. Zhu Qingjun looked at Rinpochian, and then said faintly, just like what he said, it wasn't easy for Dayo to send people to the hinterland of Great Xia. The Lien family was located much deeper than the 9 pavilions. If it wasn't for the incident at the 9 pavilions, the Lien family wouldn't be so worried that Qi Zixiao would go crazy again. As for the tens of thousands of casualties in Great Xia, it couldn't be blamed on the Lien family. On the contrary, the Lien family's incident this time even led Qi Zixiao to Great Xia. Therefore, the Lien family would at most find an opportunity to suppress them, but it wouldn't be too serious. I feel that the most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. If the Lien family can't be reunited, it would be too cruel. In order to ferret out the Lien family, we might need a husky. Rinpochian cupped his hands and said to the Empress. The aboriginals were too conspicuous. It would indeed be troublesome to send people to Great Xia to exterminate the Lien family. Therefore, a mad dog that had a grudge against the Lien family couldn't be better. In any case, even if they failed, they wouldn't lose anything. As for implicating the entire family, he didn't feel any pressure at all. In the first place, they were the ones who attacked him first, so he couldn't be blamed. Just like the Jin family, there might be some among them who didn't do evil and didn't know anything about what happened to him. However, what they enjoyed was the money they earned from their evil deeds. If they succeeded, those people would also enjoy the money stained with their own blood. Since they became rich because of this, they couldn't blame them for suffering because of this. Moreover, if they didn't pull out the roots, wouldn't they be able to survive for the new year? Tai Yin looked at Rinpochian with admiration and muttered something. The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. These words are good and imposing. I have to memorize them. Chapter 265. Rinpochian walked into the dimly lit prison. The warden carried a lantern and led the way while Su Wei followed closely behind. Rinpochian walked with his legs splayed out. He had just returned from looking at the fields outside the city. Every time he rode a fork-horned cow, he would feel a burning pain in his inner thigh. These days he had obtained some fields from other sources. Now he had a total of 200 mu of land. After exchanging fields with others, he finally managed to gather 200 mu of land. After all, everyone still gave the Empress some face. Today, Rinpochian went to take a look at the 200 mu of land. Tai Dao and Tung Hulu were in charge of it. They also hired more than 20 people, including women, children, and the elderly. However, these people were very strong. They were even stronger than the young and strong men on earth. Rinpochian watched as they carried 2 buckets the size of a water tank with great strides. Previously, when he was injured and asked for forgiveness, he brought 2 bags of seasoning seeds which were only enough to sow 50 mu of land. Fortunately, the sesame seeds in the beast park were ripe and could sow 20 mu of land. The rest of the land was planted with sweet potatoes and other crops from this world. After walking 1 round in the fields, Rinpochian returned to the city at noon and went to the prison to see Zhu Qingjun. Rinpochian was rather familiar with this prison. A few months ago, he was thrown here when he first arrived. At that time, all he could think of was how to keep his head. Who would have thought that things would take a turn for the worse and end up like this? The prison was made of stone on both sides and had an iron door in the middle. There weren't many prisoners in the prison, so there wasn't much noise. There weren't any scenes of people knocking on the iron door and crying out for their grievances like those on television. Foreigners were usually beheaded after staying here for a few days. There weren't many aboriginals who were captured here. At most, they would get into fights and be released after being whipped. Theft and robbery were basically non-existent in Lon City. In Lon City, if you threw a brick and hit someone, that person might be an earthwill expert. Open the door, I'll go in and take a look, Rinpochian said when he reached the prison cell. The cell wasn't locked and there was only an iron bar stuck outside. The aboriginals were too strong and had too many experts. They were never afraid of a prison break. Even if they could, they wouldn't be able to escape. The prison cell was very dark with only a small window shining in. At this moment, Zhu Qingjuan's complexion looked much better. After he stopped drinking wine and eating those shrimps, the injury on his leg was almost healed within a few days. Renbaqian stood at the door and looked at him. He also looked up at Renbaqian. The warden stood in front of Renbaqian to prevent him from suddenly going berserk. He had also heard of Deputy Prefect Ren's strength. How about it? I saved your life, didn't I? Shouldn't you repay me? Renbaqian said with a smile. On that day, Zhu Qingjun knew that he probably wouldn't die. Although he was imprisoned, he had been waiting to settle the score with the Lian family. He even thought that the other party would say something. No matter what, as long as the target was the Lian family, he would agree. However, he didn't expect to hear such a reply, which made him a little stunned. I'm naturally willing to deal with the Lian family. But you won't believe me so easily, right? Zhu Qingjun said. That's easy. Just one poison will do. It's like a jelly bean. It won't affect anything if you eat it, and it tastes pretty good. After taking it, one would die if there was no antidote for a period of time. After taking the antidote, one would live. Isn't that simple? I feel that since the Lian family has treated you so badly, you won't seek your own death for the sake of the Lian family, Renbaqian said. His voice was similar to those villains in his memory. In fact, what he did was similar to those villains. Zhu Qingjun laughed after hearing Renbaqian's words. It's indeed very simple. Give me the poison. There's no hurry. I'm still making the poison. Ordinary poisons don't taste good. I spent a lot of effort to coat it with a layer of sugar without destroying its medicinal properties. You stay here for a few days first. I'll let you out after a few days when it's done. Renbaqian waved his hand as though he was thinking for him. Zhu Qingjun laughed after hearing what Renbaqian said. At this stage, who would still care about the taste of poison? Yet, the other party was wasting his time in such a place. I'm here today to see how you are. I'm relieved to see that you're fine. Renbaqian nodded his head, turned around and left. Give him something good to eat. Don't let him starve. In fact, he didn't need to make poison. It was the job of the clinic. What he needed to do was to pack the sarin gas separately. It was too extravagant to throw the whole bottle out like before. He only had a few bottles left, so he had to use them sparingly. Moreover, if he threw the whole bottle out, not only the Lian family, but also the entire city, many people would die. By then Great Xia would definitely be in an uproar. Renbaqian felt that as a person, it was better to leave some leeway. There was no need to be so ruthless. The most important thing was that Great Xia still had so many experts, especially the top experts. Even though many of them didn't show up normally, poisoning a city to death was too ruthless. Who knew if a few of them would jump out to exterminate evil and defend justice? For example, that fairy like Li Yuanzhu. In any case, no matter who it was, he would be in big trouble. The guards by his side wouldn't be able to defend against such an expert. Renbaqian returned to the palace. After lunch, he sat beside the Empress and accompanied her to watch The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. The Empress even asked a few times why there was no The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 2. Renbaqian was at a loss. If the Empress asked him, who should he ask? When it was time to practice, Renbaqian stood in the middle of the training ground. Tonglan was still opposite him. She was the little Lolita with 2 buns on her head. Just like how the Empress liked red clothes, she liked white clothes. She wore white clothes every day. The only difference was that the flowers embroidered on her clothes were different. You have put on weight again. You are already 10 years old, and should be married in a few years. You are so fat. Who would dare to marry you? Renbaqian trash-talked and looked for the other party's flaws. You are already an adult, but you can't even beat me. Don't you have any shame? Tonglan was not polite at all. Her grandfather, Tongjinya, had told her not to give him face and beat him up ruthlessly. Chance. Renbaqian saw Tonglan roll her eyes when she spoke and immediately pounced on her like a ferocious tiger. After a month of hard training, his strength had improved a lot. He could already withstand one move from the little Lolita. Bang. Renbaqian lay on the ground and looked at the blue sky and white clouds. Over the past few days, he hadn't improved much in other aspects, but his ability to withstand beatings had improved tremendously. Furthermore, he didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation or retreat when fighting. His entire person was more spirited and had an indomitable aura. In the eyes of others, he was still a noob. However, Renbachian knew that he had improved a lot. He had already advanced from a level 1 noob to a level 2 noob. When he surpassed the level 9 noob and became a supreme noob, Renbachian felt that he would be able to defeat this 10-year-old Lolita. After thinking about it carefully, he didn't know why, but he felt like crying. Sigh. Such is life. After returning to Earth, Renbachian went to Vienna from Prague. Vienna was a famous music city with all kinds of concert halls. Renbachian and the Empress even specially went to listen to a classical concert. After that, their impression of the concert was that they slept soundly. When they returned, Renbachian had already decided that his next destination would be the fashion city, Milan. They will definitely go to Milan. In a certain department, more than one person thought of this. Arrange for a few people who are good at dealing with people to go there. The men shouldn't be too handsome, and the women shouldn't be too beautiful, a psychologist suggested. Following which he said with some regret, "Unfortunately, I don't meet the requirements." Chapter 266. Renbachian looked at the poisonous pill in front of him, which was the size of the fist of a 4 to 5-year-old child. His face was full of vigor, and his expression was clearly saying, "Are you kidding me? According to your request, take the antidote once every half a month. Otherwise, your intestines will rot and you will die. However, this is the limit for the size. The smell of one of the herbs is too strong, and it can't be concealed without a large amount of honey and a few other herbs. If the pill is too small, it won't have enough medicinal power. An Earthwill expert might not die from it." The doctor from the physician's bureau also had a look of disbelief on his face. He had never heard of anyone making this kind of poison that had to be sweet. Or this, the smell is too strong. The doctor took out another box and opened it. Renbachian smelled a strange smell that made him feel as if it was dug out from his foot. The pill inside was indeed much smaller than the 6-flavored Rehmannia pill that Renbachian had eaten before. "This is it. You have to keep your word. I told him it's sweet, so it has to be sweet." Renbachian immediately kept the box and turned to leave. He wasn't eating it anyway. "You have to swallow it whole," the doctor added slowly. Renbachian waved his arms with his back facing the doctor. Although the people around him were at least at the Earthwill level, and didn't seem to be anything special. However, a second-rate aristocratic family in Great Xia only had a few Earthwill experts. Although the Earthwill level was divided into the initial, intermediate, advanced, and peak levels, an initial Earthwill expert could block bullets with a saber, jump 6 to 7 meters high, and have at least 1 to 2,000 kilograms of strength. On Earth, he was already considered a Superman. Zhu Qingjun was at the intermediate level of the Earthwill level, and was even stronger. It was easy for him to swallow the pill, even if it was a little big. Renbachian asked someone to bring Zhu Qingjun to the palace. He sat in the garden of Pingle Park with a box on the stone table in front of him. When Zhu Qingjun was brought in, Renbachian was playing Plants vs. Zombies on his phone. "Wait, it will be ready soon." Renbachian looked at the phone screen nervously. After a while, he put down the phone and looked at the other party carefully. His cheeks were thin, his lips were thin, and his expression was cold. He gave off the feeling that he was a reliable person. He was dirty and had straw in his hair. However, he was much better off than Renbachian when he was only wearing a pair of underpants. He seemed to be in good spirits. There shouldn't be too much to say. You work for me, and I'll give you the antidote. If you do well, I will detoxify you. You're just an Earthwill expert, so I don't have to spend too much effort on you." Renbachian sized him up and nodded. Originally, Zhu Qingjun was still wondering what the thing in Renbachian's hand that could make a sound was. When he heard Renbachian's words, anger rose in his heart. Renbachian's words were indeed somewhat arrogant. With his strength, no matter where he went in Great Xia, he would be valued. When had he ever been looked down upon like this? However, after thinking about what he had seen over the past 2 days, even the prison warden was at the Earthwill level. All the imperial guards in the palace were at least at the Earthwill level. Renbachian couldn't help but sigh. The Aboriginals had too much of an advantage. Originally, I could have arranged for anyone to do it. It's very easy to find someone to do it, but I felt that you would be able to drag out the people of the Lien family hiding in the underground cave, so I gave you this opportunity. You can live, and you can also take revenge. It's the best of both worlds. It's just a small deal between us. Once you're done, you can fly as high as you want, Rinpoche continued. There are still a few Earthwill experts in the Lien family. Lien Qiji himself is close to an advanced Earthwill expert. It won't be easy for you to find someone to deal with them. Zhu Qingjun couldn't help but ask. Rinpoche's words made him feel that he was worthless in the eyes of the other party. It's not that troublesome. Rinpoche waved his hand and said, "You can throw this small bottle in at night. It doesn't matter if you are a hooligan or a hooligan." When Zhu Qingjun saw the transparent bottle in Rinpoche's hand, he suddenly remembered that even though Rinpoche looked no different from an ordinary person, his name had spread far and wide in Great Xia. Commoners might not know much, but almost everyone with a bit of status knew. Poison warrior. He poisoned the 9 pavilions and tens of thousands of Dayo's elite soldiers to death. Is that poison in his hand? 8 spirit will level pavilion masters of the 9 pavilions died under his poison. Even a spirit will expert couldn't withstand it, let alone an earth will expert. Indeed, the other party could have just found a random person to throw the bottle into the Lien family. No wonder the other party didn't care about him at all. At the thought of this, Zhu Qingjun felt slightly disappointed. A person's value needed to be recognized by others. When others denied your value, most people would feel disappointed. Alright, eat it, swallow it whole. Rinpoche pushed the box in front of Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun opened the box and stared blankly. How could a child's fist be swallowed? This medicine is still very reliable. As long as you take the antidote regularly, you will definitely not die. If you don't take the antidote, you will definitely not survive. It won't act up prematurely or later. It's very stable. It's just a little big. I believe in you, there won't be any problem. Rinpoche encouraged him. Zhu Qingjun closed his eyes and stuffed the pill into his mouth. Then he continued to stuff it down. Rinpoche saw that his throat was swollen, just like a snake swallowing a large prey. Seeing that Zhu Qingjun almost choked to death after swallowing the super big pill, Rinpoche hurriedly asked someone to get him some water. It took him a long time to recover from his coughing. After that, Rinpoche gave Zhu Qingjun half a year's worth of antidote, a small bottle of sarin gas, and a bottle of antidote. Finally, he gave Zhu Qingjun his contact details before letting someone bring him away. When Zhu Qingjun walked out of the palace, he suddenly felt that the sky was a little brighter. On the way to Dayo, he thought that he would definitely die. He did not expect that not only would he be able to take revenge, but he would also have a chance to survive. No matter what, the first thing to do now was to take revenge. He had done so much for the Lien family, but in the end he was silenced. He could not rely on the other party to keep his word. He had to find someone to see if the poison could be cured. Although he had to take revenge on the Lien family, the feeling of having his life and death ring in the hands of others wasn't pleasant either. No matter what, he was still an Earthwill expert. Now that he had survived, it was his instinct to want to control his own life. As long as he survived this time, he would definitely work hard in the future. He would work hard by hook or by crook. He would never be looked down upon like this again. The river flows east for 30 years, and the river flows west for 30 years. Do not bully the young for being poor. Zhu Qingjun's indifferent face was filled with resolution and determination. Rinpoche's words had more or less hurt his pride. Even if he could understand, he still couldn't let go of the other party's contempt. Oh, that Zhu Qingjun was drinking in a pub? Rinpoche initially thought that Zhu Qingjun would leave immediately. He didn't expect him to find a place to drink first. Was this considered as a way to celebrate his survival? After that, he had a conflict with someone and was severely injured. If it wasn't for the people from the Public Order Bureau who arrived in time, I'm afraid he would have been beaten to death, the guard continued. Rinpoche spat out a mouthful of tea. It wasn't easy for him to save Zhu Qingjun's life. Chapter 267. That night, Zhu Qingjun was quickly sent away from Lan City. Ren Baqian really didn't dare to let him stay here any longer. If he were to lose his mind and throw out that bottle of sarin gas, it would be fun to watch. However, Ren Baqian also thought of some other matters. After he returned, he wasn't in a hurry to exterminate the Lien family. Instead, he needed to locate the other members of the Lien family first. After all, although they were sent to other places, they still had some contact with the Lien family. If the Lien clan was exterminated first, those people might really conceal their identities and go into hiding. At that time, it would not be easy to dig out those rats. In any case, as long as this husky was sent back to Great Xia, everything else would have nothing to do with him. It would be best if he succeeded, but it didn't matter if he failed. However, he also felt that although the aboriginals were very strong, there were many things that were really inconvenient. For example, if he had another group of people under him, he wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Another example would be sending spies out. The aboriginals had very few spies in the outside world. They completely relied on a small number of caravans, such as the 2 caravans of the royal family, to gather some information while traveling outside. There were also a few skinnier aboriginals who looked more like ordinary aboriginals from the other empires. However, the aboriginals weren't good at this. Furthermore, the people from the other nations were also very wary of them, so it wasn't easy for them to gather information. Ren Baqian felt that the remnant citizens of the Hao nation in the south were a good choice. However, he now counted the matters at hand. On one hand, there was the matter of the glass, and on the other hand, there was the matter of the well salt in the mountains that had not been dealt with. After these 2 matters were settled, he was prepared to make a trip to the south. However, the incident with the glass had caused Ren Baqian to pull out quite a lot of his hair. Looking at the hair on his pillow every day, Ren Baqian decided to shave his head bald. It was easy to remove the color of the glass as long as the iron in the glass was oxidized with potassium nitrate. Potassium nitrate was also relatively easy to obtain. However, the silver mirror reaction really made Ren Baqian want to vomit blood. He listed out all the silver reaction processes that he had found on the internet. First of all, ammonia was not available. Secondly, to obtain nitric acid, one needed nitrogen dioxide plus water, or sodium nitrate plus sulfuric acid. To make nitric oxide, however, you need nitric acid. As for sodium nitrate, he had yet to discover where it could be found in this world. After a long time, it turned out that to need eggs, there had to be chickens first. However, chickens still needed eggs to hatch. After Ren Baqian shaved his head bald, he started to scratch his scalp. Ren Baqian's scalp was about to be scratched off, but he couldn't do anything about it. Feeling helpless, he felt that it would be better for him to move from Earth to this world. Later on, when this world had the concept of chemistry, he would let them study it. "I want to teach a few students," Ren Baqian suddenly said when he found the Empress. The Empress was a little surprised. She didn't expect him to have such a thought. Wasn't he afraid of trouble the most? These thoughts were practically written all over the Empress's face. "There are some things that I have to do, but I don't even have enough time to spend on it. I feel that it's better to teach a few students so that I can relax in the future," Ren Baqian said helplessly. Every day, he had to spend half of his time practicing martial arts and doing all kinds of things. Ren Baqian felt that his time was definitely not limited to 24 hours. At the very least, he had much less time than others. The Empress first asked Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan to wait outside. After looking at Ren Baqian for a long time, she said, "Actually, I have always had this thought. Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chun nation all have their own national academies. However, there was no such place in Dayo. Since you want to teach a few students, why don't you build an academy so that the aboriginals can have a place to learn some things? Originally, I wanted to discuss this matter at a later time. Since you have brought it up, why don't we do it this way?" Ah. Ren Baqian opened his mouth wide and was a little stunned. He only wanted to teach a few students so that they could help him do some things. Why did it suddenly become an academy? If it was a few days later, he might not necessarily object to it. However, he still had to practice martial arts every day. There was also the glass factory and the like. He also had to think about how to fill up the treasury of the palace. Where would he find the time? Why are you unwilling? The Empress's expression changed in an instant. It wasn't ice cold, but yearning. Her eyes were filled with expectation. These few years, Dayo has sent out many people, but they haven't been able to gain much. Even though the various officials in the imperial court have obtained some books from other nations, they aren't systematic, and there is no one to teach them. As for the ordinary aboriginals, it is already very difficult for them to learn words, let alone other things. You have told me before that knowledge is power. In your world, countless ordinary people are the foundation. The geniuses born among them lead the direction of the entire world. Only then can they reach that stage. However, it is too difficult for my Dayo to achieve this. As the Empress spoke, she got up from the couch and walked in front of Rinpochian. She stared straight into Rinpochian's eyes as if she wanted to see through his heart. Only you can do this and let me see the scene that I want to see. In that case, are you willing to do this for me? Her eyes were bright, and her face was filled with expectation as she waited for Rinpochian's answer. This wasn't the first time Rinpochian saw such an expression. When he first arrived on Earth and looked at the brightly lit city, her expression was somewhat similar to this one. However, this was the first time the Empress showed such an expression to him. The distance between their faces was less than 10 centimeters. Rinpochian could feel the heat that was transmitted to his body when she breathed. He could also smell the fragrance that was coming from her. He could even see himself in her eyes, which made his heart beat faster. The direction that your gaze points to is the direction that I will advance in, Rinpochian said gently. Upon hearing this, the Empress revealed a rare bright smile on her face. Following which, she returned to the couch with a smile on her face and said, "That's settled then. You will be in charge of the new school. As for the name, let's call it. I will leave the honor of naming it to you." The Empress seriously considered for a while, and realized that she actually couldn't think of a suitable name. She immediately handed over the responsibility of naming it to Rinpochian. Rinpochian looked at the Empress's triumphant expression, and the smile at the corner of her mouth. Then he thought about her expression and tone that didn't match her character. He felt that the Empress had learned bad things from those period dramas. Indeed, he had opened the door to a new world for the Empress. However, they have to start from learning how to read, Rinpochian said bluntly. Originally, he wanted to translate the words from Earth into the words of this world. At this moment, he simply changed his mind and let them start from simplified Chinese. You can make the arrangements. I hope to see a batch of real talents emerge from it, the Empress said. I'll do my best. Rinpochian thought for a while. Those who had received basic education should be considered talents in Dayo. He would pick out a few who were smarter, quick-witted, and could accept new things to learn more things. They would then be his assistants. What about the students? How do we recruit them? Not all of the children in the imperial court are gifted. Those who aren't gifted will be sent to the school, the Empress said while scratching her chin. Rinpochian spread his hands. Just now, the Empress made it sound as if she had pinned all her hopes on this school. In the end, it would become a shelter for useless people. However, those who were gifted would definitely focus on practicing martial arts. After all, this world wasn't Earth. In the end, martial arts were still the most important. Even though martial arts couldn't solve all problems, it could solve most of them. Chapter 268. In the throne room, Tong Zhinya, you old man, do you want to taste the sharpness of this old man's saber? Qin Chuan's eyes were like two copper bells, and his voice was so loud that it could lift the roof. Ever since he heard this from somewhere, everyone's ears had grown calluses. Master Qin, do you think I'm afraid of you? Last time at House Yunyan, I don't know who fell into the puddle afterward. Tong Zhinya had a faint smile on his face. Many people burst out laughing. The last time they fought at the top of the brothel, both sides were supposed to be tied. In the end, Qin Chuan's wife shouted from below. At that time, Qin Chuan was caught unprepared and was kicked into a puddle in the neighboring courtyard by Tong Zhinya. Qin Chuan regarded this matter as a great humiliation. He didn't expect that Tang Jianye would use this to provoke him at this time. He was so angry that his eyes turned red, and he slammed into Qin Chuan. In an instant, there was almost an afterimage behind him. Qin Chuan was already prepared. He punched out with both fists, one above and one below. Just like that, the two of them started fighting in the throne room. The people around them were already used to this kind of thing. Lord Qin's Black Tiger Steel's heart. Move is really quick. Mr. Qin, it's Black Tiger Steel's heart again. Mr. Qin, it's still Black Tiger Steel's heart. Everyone nodded in disgust. If Renbaqian were here, his eyeballs would have popped out. Was Dayo's court assembly like this? Minister of War. What the hell are you doing with the words Black Tiger digging out heart, and Black Tiger digging out heart? And Tang Jianye, where are you kicking? There's even a kick to the groin? The Empress sat in the seat of honor with one hand resting on her chin. She was bored to death as she watched the two of them fight. She was thinking about Hua Qiangu, whom she had seen last night. After a long while, the Empress sat up slightly and looked to her left and right. Suddenly her eyes lit up. She picked up two red objects that were about 7 inches long, 3.5 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. She weighed them in her hand and then flew them toward the two of them with a whistling sound. You're right. Pa. Pa. The two objects smashed into the two men's heads and immediately broke into pieces. The two men patted the dust off their heads and turned to look for the source of the hidden weapons. Then they cupped their hands and greeted, Your Majesty. Almost every time, it would end like this. There's one more thing. I'm going to set up a school in the next few days. If there are any suitable descendants in your families, you can send them over. The Empress wiped her hands after throwing the brick away. Then she cupped her chin and said, Academy? Everyone was stunned. I've heard of academies, but the other 3 countries have them. However, this was the first time in Dayo. Your Majesty, who is in charge of the academy? Shiqing asked as he shook his sleeves. Opening a school was a good thing, but who would teach them? Renbaqian, Deputy Prefect Ren, the Empress said faintly. Everyone was stunned for a moment, then asked, Your Majesty, what kind of disciple do you want? Smart and quick-witted, don't be too old. The Empress said faintly. This was requested by Renbaqian. They were too old and difficult to teach. Their worldview had already been formed. However, they couldn't all be too young. If they were 7 or 8 years old, they would have to learn for 10 years before they could use them. It would be best if some of them were 15 or 16 years old. After 2 or 3 years of study, they would be of use. As for the younger ones, we can slowly nurture them. After hearing the Empress's request, everyone nodded in agreement. They didn't know if Renbaqian had the ability to do so. Anyway, he had a lot of strange things in his hands. Since Her Majesty had spoken and the matter of the academy wasn't a big deal, everyone naturally wouldn't object. However, it was another matter if there were any suitable disciples in the family. At this point in time, Renbaqian had also seen the location of the academy. It was just beside the palace. On one side of the palace was a beast park, and on the other side was a martial arts training ground. The main purpose was for the Imperial Guards to practice martial arts during their shifts. It was more than 200 meters long and 100 meters wide. There were many huge rocks like the ones Renbaqian saw Xiongpai playing with before. There were also various kinds of stone locks and some wooden stakes that were as thick as the mouth of a bowl, and about 2 meters tall. Renbaqian saw an Imperial Guard that he had seen before standing 150 meters away with a bow. The guard shot an arrow and the wooden stake, which was as thick as the mouth of a bowl, broke into 2. This power was equivalent to that of a sniper rifle. There was an empty space beside this martial arts training ground. It was slightly smaller than the martial arts training ground. It had never been used and had long been overgrown with weeds. Next to this empty space was a forest. The location of the academy was this deserted empty space. Renbaqian walked one round here and had a plan in mind. In any case, there wouldn't be many students and he wouldn't have the time to teach even if there were more. He just had to build a courtyard and a few rooms. In Renbaqian's mind, 30 to 40 students would be enough. However, it was time to return to Earth. These things could be discussed after they returned. Zixiao, let's go and rob. Renbaqian said to the Empress with a serious face. Look, There's only 25,000 left. It had been 4 months since they had fled, but they had only been on Earth for slightly more than a month. The original 1 million yuan was worth more than 120,000 euros. Even though they didn't have many accommodations during this trip to Europe, the Empress still spent 100,000 yuan in 1 month. It was faster than what Rinpochian had expected. Furthermore, this was Milan, the famous fashion capital. He was afraid that the two of them would be penniless when they left this place. It was easy to find a target. He heard that there were many mafias in Italy. After hearing Rinpochian's words, the Empress seriously considered it. She hesitated for a moment between shopping and robbing. After about a second, she looked at Rinpochian and nodded. Okay. Rinpochian almost laughed out loud. The serious expression on the Empress's face when she seriously considered this matter was really too interesting. What are you laughing at? The Empress squinted her eyes and looked at him. Robbing didn't give her any psychological burden. Today, a large portion of Daeyo's weapons were looted when they attacked the Yun nation in the early years. Needless to say, the entire Daeyo was looted. I think it should be like this. Everything under the heavens belongs to the king. What belongs to them belongs to you, your majesty. Rinpochian had a serious look on his face. Saying it this way sounded more elegant. The Empress thought about it again. Pow. Rinpochian looked at his pig-trotter-like hand with a hidden bitterness on his face. Your Majesty, when did you learn to fight like this? The two of them weren't in a hurry to buy anything. Instead, they strolled around the city. The Roman, Gothic, and Renaissance buildings that could be seen everywhere piqued their interest. When they arrived at the square of the Milan Cathedral, the Empress took a few more glances at the magnificent buildings in the distance. This kind of Gothic architecture always attracted people's attention at first glance. Under the blue sky, the cathedral, the square, the tourists on the square, and the pigeons that could be seen everywhere formed a beautiful picture. When the two of them walked on the square, a flock of pigeons flew past them. A big black man placed a handful of pigeon food in Rinpochian's hand. Immediately, a few pigeons flew towards Rinpochian as if they had found their target. One of them pecked at his hand. Rinpochian smiled and scattered the food in his hand. Immediately, a flock of pigeons flew around the two of them. A few people at the side couldn't help but take out their mobile phones to take pictures of the lady in red who was surrounded by pigeons. As for Rinpochian, he was treated as a backdrop. When the pigeons landed, the big black man stretched out his hand with a smile on his face and said, "Money." Rinpochian looked at him and laughed. This was the usual routine of these people. First, they would stuff a handful of pigeon food in your hand and let you enjoy the feeling of being surrounded by pigeons. Then they would ask for money. If you didn't give money, then very soon, 3 to 5 big black men would appear. Furthermore, these people mainly targeted people with yellow skin. Get lost. Rinpochian maintained his smile, but his tone was filled with contempt. He had already calculated that when the big black man's helpers arrived, he would take them down together. Then he and the Empress would randomly find a remote place, and then these people would follow them and give them money. Although the money might not be a lot, the wealth of a millionaire was also accumulated over time. They couldn't just give up on picking up the pigeons just because they didn't have much money. After all, they had to specifically find suitable targets to rob. Now they just had to bend over and pick up the pigeons. Sure enough, after a whistle, 4 tall and strong big black men immediately surrounded the two of them. They were mumbling something and had a threatening expression on their faces. Rinpochian snapped his fingers, and the Empress looked at him with dissatisfaction. There are too many people, and there are so many people watching. Rinpochian smiled shyly and pointed to the surroundings. They only felt a gust of wind blow past them. In the next second, the 4 of them cried out in pain and fell to the ground. No one present could see what exactly happened. The Empress's movements were too fast. Rinpochian timely put on a shocked expression and said, "You guys actually faked falling." However, just as he shouted this, he saw a few people take off their coats, revealing their police uniforms. Chapter 269. We are the Federal Police. May I ask if they threatened you? After a few Italian police officers surrounded them, one of them pointed at the people at his feet and asked Rinpochian. It was in Italian. Rinpochian was at a loss. He looked at the ID that the other party flashed and thought for a while. He should be saying that we have defeated someone and wants us to follow them to the police station, which I have saw us hitting people. Rinpochian didn't know if he was talking to himself or to the Empress, but he sounded a little doubtful. Rinpochian knew his situation very well. Both of them did not even have passports and were burdened with cases. If they were to enter the police station, they would have no choice but to fight their way out. There was no need to enter the police station. With a few more questions from the police, the two of them would give themselves away. He would have to kill his way out sooner or later, so it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. It was a pity that he had only been in Milan for half a day and had yet to take a look around. Damned fishing law enforcement. Rinpochian cursed in his heart. All of a sudden he leaped up and stomped his feet on the ground. In an instant he appeared in front of the police officer and gave him a tight slap on his ear. Rinpochian's current strength was around 330 kilograms, which was considered quite strong. That police officer did not even have the chance to groan before he was smashed to the ground like a wooden stake. The police officers were stunned by the sudden turn of events. What was going on? The rest of them hurriedly reached for their holsters, but before they could pull out their guns, they were all sent flying. The onlookers were also stunned. A middle-aged man in the crowd had a satisfied look on his face. He had sent people to monitor the route from the north to Milan, and sure enough, the two of them had arrived. He had guessed their route and destination, so he had come here in advance to wait for them. Knowing that the two of them were extremely vicious, he was afraid that they would get into trouble again. He even hired a few Italian police officers to help them clean up the mess. This was to prevent the two of them from escaping after committing a crime like they did in Japan. This could be considered as a sign of his sincerity. However, he had guessed the beginning correctly, but not the ending. When he saw Rinpochian suddenly slap the police officer, the expression on his face froze in an instant. In the next second, the police officers were all lying on the ground unconscious. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't you feel any pressure at all when you openly attack a police officer? Do you still have a little bit of conscience? Can't you guys share the good stuff? Are you going to fight all over the world? Did they really think that the country was useless? Well, some countries in Europe were indeed incompetent. The middle-aged man looked like he was about to vomit blood. Seeing that Rinpochian and Gu Shijia were about to leave, he hurriedly chased after them and asked, "Can I have a word with you too?" Rinpochian and the Empress ignored him, turned around and left. The people around them made way for the two of them. That middle-aged man chased Rinpochian for half a street. Rinpochian suddenly stopped, and his hand was already on his waist. The middle-aged man was startled by Rinpochian's actions. He consciously raised his hands to show that he had no ill intentions and said, "I'm here to help you." Rinpochian pulled up his pants and grinned at him, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. "I'm here to help you. Can we talk? I'm not representing myself. You know what I mean," the middle-aged man said quickly, afraid that the other party would lose their minds. "I'm not free," Rinpochian replied. "If the two of you are worried about the Italian police, our men will take care of those police officers," the middle-aged man continued. When Rinpochian heard this, he felt that it was somewhat interesting. "They are the undercover agents that you planted here?" Rinpochian's face was full of vigor. The middle-aged man almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Recently, we have done a lot of things to help you clean up the mess you left behind. Otherwise, do you think that the Japanese police wouldn't be able to find out about the two of you?" The middle-aged man continued and pointed to a coffee shop by the roadside. "The two of you sit down and have a chat." Rinpochian looked at the Empress, but she didn't care about this at all. Her gaze was focused in the distance. Rinpochian followed her gaze and saw a bright display window. There was a floral skirt paired with a red top. "All right, you look more pleasing to the eye than the previous few." Rinpochian nodded. In any case, the other party had helped him clean up a lot of messes. Furthermore, he didn't have much money on hand. If they could come to an agreement, would he be able to transfer the 20 million yuan to Chongqing? After a while, The three of them sat in the coffee shop. Let me introduce myself first. My surname is Chen Shi. The middle-aged man introduced himself. At the same time, he sized up the two of them. Ren Baqian, male, 25 years old, Han Chinese, graduated from SY University, then worked at SY Zhongqing Trading Company for 8 months. All the information was clearly remembered in his mind. However, at this moment, Ren Baqian looked completely different from the delicate and slightly reserved young man in the photo. Compared to the photo, he was much more robust, bald, and gave off a very strange vibe. On one hand, he didn't seem to care much about anything. On the other hand, he gave off a very sharp vibe. At the same time, there was a little shadow of his previous self. As for the other person, Qi Zixiao, female, unknown. Other than her name and gender, everything else was unknown. It was as if she had popped out from a crack in a rock. After all, for a person like her, it was impossible to hide her looks, temperament, and strength. Especially when she was sitting there without saying a word, she gave off a little pressure. It was as if she was someone who held the power of life and death for a long time. It was impossible for such a person to have popped out from a crack in a rock. However, he couldn't find any information about her. It was a complete blank. It was these two people who had committed so many crimes in their country. After escaping to our nation, they didn't restrain themselves at all. Along the way, they went sightseeing and committed murder after murder. In their eyes, human life was like grass. According to the recent investigation, a murder in Austria should be related to these two people. Oh, Rinpoche nodded and stirred his cup with a small spoon. The Empress hugged her yogurt and slurped it in small mouthfuls. Chunshur waited for a long time, but the two of them didn't have any intention to continue the conversation. He looked slightly helpless. Those Italian police officers just now were helping you, Chunshur finally said. Oh, I thought they were arresting us, Rinpoche said innocently. Chunshur looked at Rinpoche's innocent expression and felt his chest tighten. Couldn't you have asked more? There were so many people around. As long as you opened your mouth, someone would immediately tell you what they were talking about. Furthermore, I was standing right beside you. Who would have thought that you would make a move in front of so many people without saying a word? I knew that you would stir up trouble here. I specially bribed a few police officers to help me clean up the place. I was afraid that you would stir up trouble again, Chunshur said with a sullen face. Rinpoche nodded. He thought that the police and robbers had encountered a fishing expedition. However, you are disturbing me from picking up money. Seeing that Rinpoche was indifferent and Qi Zixiao was focused on drinking yogurt, Chunshur felt even more sullen. How much work have we done for you? Bribing the Italian police and interfering with our nation's investigation. We have done all these things that we shouldn't have done. Don't the two of you know what to do? If it was someone else, he would have already slammed the table. However, he really didn't dare to do so in front of these two people. The other party would definitely turn hostile and leave. He didn't know how long it would take to find them again. If he angered them, they would shoot him and continue to escape. He believed that they would definitely do such a thing. These two people were extremely daring. Chapter 270. Let's get down to business. Chunshur cleared his throat and said seriously, both of you aren't going to continue like this, are you? If not for someone helping you deal with the loose ends, I'm afraid both of you wouldn't be so relaxed now. The Empress sneered when she heard this. After staying in this world for so long, she really didn't think that anyone could do anything to her. Although there were indeed powerful weapons in this world, she wasn't a blockhead. Most importantly, if she wanted to kill someone who could escape. Most importantly, she didn't belong to this world at all. Chunshur knew what Qi Zixiao was thinking when he saw his expression, but he didn't mind. Instead, he said, both of you think the country is too simple. Perhaps conventional means can't do anything to you. But there are many unconventional means. If necessary, for example, if our nation finds out that you are different, they may not use too much force, but other means are hard to defend against. For example, poisonous gas, chemical incapacitating agents, infrasonic weapons, there are too many. Now, it's no longer the world where individual strength is supreme. There are too many new weapons that are hard to defend against. Perhaps it's difficult to equip the entire army or use them on the battlefield, but it's possible to deal with a small number of targets. To put it simply, every bite of food you eat may contain something that can threaten you. For a cake like this, perhaps only the middle layer had a little bit of something. You won't even know how you got hit. The Empress stuffed the cake into her mouth expressionlessly. Renbaqian thought about it carefully. Part of what Qinshi said was right. One should not underestimate the power of a nation. The power that any nation could mobilize was unimaginable to them. However, other things were easier said than done. However, there was one thing. If there was an opportunity, he and the Empress would be in big trouble. Although there were a lot of people who fled and lived freely in other countries for decades, the premise was that the country didn't really care about them. If the country really cared about a person, then what Qinshi said might happen. One could be a thief for 1,000 days, but one couldn't guard against thieves for 1,000 days. It was impossible for him and the Empress to not relax at all. Unless they ran to a desolate and uninhabited place, then they had to be careful of a bomb that dropped from their heads. Of course, the Empress wasn't someone to be trifled with. If she wanted to kill someone, unless that person wasn't on Earth, no one could escape. Therefore, both sides were afraid of each other. But the most important thing was that he wasn't prepared to keep floating outside. Previously, they had no choice but to run away. If they had the chance to live a stable life, no one would choose to run away. In fact, he and the other party hit it off very well. Furthermore, I believe that there must be a reason behind your escape this time. Judging from your previous actions, you did not rely on your strength to challenge the law or affect social order. We've also investigated the Jin family and learned some of their style. There must be a reason why they appeared in your house. As for your temperament, we have more or less understood it. Qinshi said to Renbaqian. He did understand a little. In those cases in Japan, almost all of the victims were skinheads, ultranationalists, and almost all of them had various criminal records. If no one provoked the two of them would not make trouble out of nothing. However, if someone provoked the two of them, there was nothing they wouldn't dare to do. Just like what had been said before, their guts were boundless. At least, that was the case before. If Qinshi hadn't found the two of them in Milan, he probably wouldn't have thought this way after a few days. Renbaqian looked at the other party's words. Since the other party had already built a ladder for him, of course he had to step down. He immediately put on an aggrieved expression. He was almost at the point of perfection in changing his expression. Who did I provoke at home? I stayed at home obediently, but trouble came from the sky. Not only did that Jin Jun rob me of my shares, but he also threatened me with my family. I was also forced to do so. What was that saying again? When an ordinary man gets angry, blood will splash 5 steps away. Then you exterminated the entire Jin family. Qinshi smiled bitterly. This was really a case of an ordinary man getting angry. It's not like you don't know what kind of style they have. They had already threatened me with the lives of their family. When I saw this, if calling the police was useful, they wouldn't be alive and kicking. They are rich and powerful, while I am just a little b****. I thought about it and decided to sacrifice me for the happiness of thousands of families. Renbaqian had a look of, I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. Qinshi was stunned when he heard this. This fellow really knew how to back down. However, it was much easier for him to speak this way. No matter what, murder is still a big crime. However, the nation is very interested in some of the things that you have shown, and is willing to give you a chance. The Empress raised her eyebrows and squinted her eyes. Give me a chance? The table under her hand immediately broke into a pile of broken pieces, and everything on the table fell to the ground. When Renbaqian saw the Empress open her mouth, he knew something was wrong. He immediately retracted his leg and was unscathed. On the other hand, Qinshi was spilled with coffee all over his pants. Fortunately, the coffee wasn't too hot anymore. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. He was sweating profusely. The main reason he was sweating was because of the aura emitted by Qi Zixiao just now. It made him unable to move, and his heart was beating wildly. It was as if it was about to explode. Before this, He had never thought that a person's aura could be so terrifying. Boss, the quality of the table is too poor. Rinpoche turned his head and shouted. Chunshur was speechless. After a while, the three of them changed to another corner. I remember that you said that you wanted to cooperate? Rinpoche said faintly. Now all the grievances on his face had disappeared. His expression was similar to that of the Empress, plain and a little cold. It can also be considered a cooperation. Chunshur immediately changed the topic. This guy's expression really changed at a whim. Tell me about the specifics, Rinpoche continued. For example, some of the things in your hands, the laboratory of you and Chunyen. I think you have other things in your hands that are very valuable. For example, the skills of this person. I'm very curious. Are there really legendary cultivators in this world? If so, can they be imparted to others? There are a lot of things that the nation is interested in. I think there are a lot of things that you can give up. In fact, they don't even affect you. At this point, Chunshur's eyes were a little fervent. Rinpoche gently tapped his fingers on the table. In that case, what can we get? We can write off everything that happened in the past, suppress the domestic affairs, and revoke the arrest warrant. However, there is a prerequisite. You can't act so recklessly and must abide by the law. At the same time, if you have any other requests, you can raise them. I will report to the higher-ups, Chunshur continued. Chunshur thought for a while and spoke again. Also, did you say Emperor just now? I'm very curious about this person's identity. Just now the Empress said, give me a chance. In this half a day he had thought of all kinds of possibilities, but from the tone and the content of the words, he felt that it was Emperor. He felt that there might be a huge secret behind it, and this made him a little excited. The Empress turned her head to look at Rinpoche, then turned her head to the other side to admire the oil painting on the wall. Rinpoche was silent for a while. Then he lowered his voice and slowly said, since you have sensed it, then I will say it directly. Actually, she is Wuxia. Back then, she gave up the throne to cultivate. Now that she has returned from her cultivation, everything in the world has become smoke. However, she still has 1,000,000 soldiers. The nation will lend us 100 million first, and after we unfreeze the 1,000,000 soldiers. Chunshur looked as if he had eaten **T. Rinpoche pondered for a while. What should he do with 1,000,000 soldiers? He couldn't possibly rebel, right? These words couldn't be said carelessly. After that, we can make a Tang Dynasty terracotta army or something. Chapter 271. Forget about the 1,000,000-strong army. As for the rest, you can guess if I'm telling the truth. Rinpoche spread his hands and said. Chunshur's mind was filled with the word emperor. Those who could say this word were either delusional or he didn't dare to think about it. If it was someone else, he would have given them a slap. However, the Empress's strength made him overthink. After all, from the current information, the Empress's strength wasn't something a human could achieve. From the video, her speed was twice as fast as a human falling from the sky. It was hard to see her figure clearly and had to be played in slow motion. In other words, a normal person fell from the sky at about 23 meters per second, but she fell at more than 70 meters per second. That was a little more than a second to cover 100 meters. Imagine a person who was 100 meters away 1 second and appeared in front of you in the next. For an ordinary person, it was like teleportation, and they wouldn't be able to react within a short distance. Not to mention, the Empress didn't slow down after carrying Rinpoche. She stepped on the wall and leaped to another building that was 100 meters away. This showed that she was even more powerful. This kind of speed and jumping force wasn't something a human could achieve. Correspondingly, how strong was she? If she was a cultivator, Chunshur would believe it. If she was a cultivator, how long had she lived? What was her true identity? Chunshur didn't even dare to think about it. It was really terrifying to think about it. Rinpoche looked at Chunshur's grave face and was pondering the pros and cons of saying this. If the other party really thought that the Empress was a cultivator, it wasn't that he couldn't produce a secret manual. The secret manuals of Great Xia were enough for them to chew on for a while. Moreover, the lifespan of an Earth will expert would indeed increase. An Earth embryo expert could live up to 100 years, and a spirit will expert could live up to 150 years. There was an even higher level above the spirit wheel realm, which was comparable to the Aboriginals' longevity heaven. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a cultivation technique. At the same time, there was an advantage to saying this, which was that the things in his hands could be explained. Otherwise, there were many things that couldn't be explained. As for whether or not it would be exposed, it would have to wait until someone on Earth reached the spirit wheel realm. Renbachian believed that martial arts wouldn't be widely disseminated in a short period of time. Given the small number of people who practice martial arts, it would take a long time for someone to reach the spirit wheel level. If Renbachian didn't remember wrongly, Great Xiao's cultivation technique also required some rare treasures. Was there really someone on Earth who could reach the spirit wheel level? Moreover, he was not worried that someone on Earth would cultivate to an extremely high level. On the contrary, if Earth could really find a way to cultivate to a very high level, it was not necessarily a bad thing for him. Perhaps he could push himself to a higher level. Otherwise, he really doubted how far he would be able to go on his own. After all, he was unable to cultivate other techniques, and no one knew what the Rui visualization technique was like. Even though he could smoothly advance to the Earth will level, there was still a barrier after that. If he were to stop at the Earth will level, the lifespan of an Earth will expert was only 100 years. At the same time, because he had traveled between two worlds, due to the difference in the flow of time, his lifespan might be shorter than those who had always been in the other world. The Empress could live to 200 years old, and if she broke through to longevity heaven, she could live to 300 years old. This was very likely. As for whether this would pose a threat to him, he had never worried about this problem. He had the backing of a world, and he would also be rich and powerful on Earth. No matter how bad his situation was, it wouldn't be too bad. It was much better than if he were to stop at the Earth will level in the future. At the thought of this, he had an idea and was prepared to make a big lie. Of course, he had to do it bit by bit. No one would cherish things that came too easily. Chunshi, who was sitting opposite him, pondered for a long time before raising his head and asking, "What other requests do you have? You can raise them all at once. I will report to the higher-ups together." "Money. Give me 100 million euros first. I have no money to spend. If you didn't come, I was prepared to rob someone." Renbachian spread his hands on the table and finally spoke the truth. Chunshi pondered for a while. When Renbachian ran away, he brought 1 million euros with him, which was only slightly more than 100,000 euros. If he was a little extravagant, it would be gone very quickly. How would the two of them make money after that? Work. To quote a famous saying, it was impossible to work, not even in this lifetime. If the two of them could find a place to work and earn money, he would tear off his head and kick it like a ball. In that case, he was afraid that it would really be like what the other party said. At the thought of this, Chunshi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These two people really made him speechless. Forget about 100 million. The country's money doesn't come from nowhere. I can help you settle the domestic affairs. You seem to have money with someone else, right? I don't even have money. How can I cooperate? Renbachian retorted. Chunshi was speechless. He had to admit that the other party was really a bastard. He was representing the country. Could he not be so straightforward? What can you offer in exchange for cooperation? Chunshi emphasized the word cooperation. Some rare and precious treasures. Renbachian pondered about the things from that world. Many of them should be considered rare and precious. After all, they were things from another world. As for whether they were rare or not, he could just change to something else. Furthermore, he still had a killer weapon, the elongation saber. Although this saber was a little weak and would break at the slightest touch, this didn't mean that the elongation saber was worthless. If it could be researched, imagine soldiers fighting with daggers and bayonets and suddenly growing 2 meters. Furthermore, with Earth's technology, they might not necessarily be able to research anything from it. For example, 1 kilogram of iron becoming 1 kilogram of iron? 1 kilogram of gold becoming 1 kilogram of gold? 1 barrel of oil becoming 2 barrels? If she is really an immortal cultivator, will the martial arts of immortality work? Chunshur asked the question that he was most concerned about. You can't become fat in one go. As for cooperation, let's do it bit by bit. Renbachian didn't reject and left some hope for the other party. I need to report to the higher-ups. Please wait a moment. Chunshur gestured to the two of them and stood up to leave. After he left, the Empress turned her head and asked, "Who is Wu Zetian?" The only female Empress in history, the most famous woman, and much more powerful than most men. Renbachian was spouting nonsense just now and hurriedly explained to the Empress now. I am myself. I don't need to impersonate anyone, and no one can be compared to me. The Empress looked unhappy. If it was someone else, she would have smashed him into a meat patty. Of course. It's just that you can't tell them about your identity, and they have no way of knowing. You are the most unique one. No one can be compared to you, be it in the past or in the future. Just like the words on the mirror. Renbachian comforted her softly. The Empress naturally knew that her identity couldn't be revealed in this world. After hearing what he said, she ignored him and turned her dissatisfaction into appetite. She ordered another serving of dessert. After waiting for a while, Chunshur hurriedly returned. After sitting down, he said, "Someone wants to talk to you." The Europe trip hasn't ended yet. Renbachian waved his hand. A video call will do, Chunshur said. Renbachian nodded. Let's go to another place. At the same time, we also want to know how strong she is and how strong she is. After all, there are many things that we need to see with our own eyes before we can be at ease. Renbachian looked at the Empress. Even though there wasn't much change in her expression, he could imagine that she was very unhappy. He moved closer to her and whispered, "Mortals, let me show you my strength. You should have this kind of thought." His breath tickled the Empress's ear and her body trembled a little. However, after hearing his words, she felt that it wasn't that hard to accept. She just felt that this sentence was indescribably shameful. Chunshur made a phone call first. After a while, when the three of them went out, there was already a car waiting outside. Before getting into the car, Renbachian whispered to the Empress, "Don't use your full strength, just show a little bit of strength." The Empress waved her hand. She didn't need Renbachian to say this. In fact, her other state was her true strength. Renbachian didn't know about this, and not many people knew about it. Hua Sanlu knew about it, but he was already dead. The 8 pavilion masters were dead as well. The 2 disciples who barely survived couldn't tell anything about the Empress's condition. After a while, everyone appeared outside the city at a remote place. After getting out of the car, Chunshur fiddled with his laptop for a while, and pointed the screen at the 2 of them. On the other side of the screen was a middle-aged man wearing glasses. He looked very dignified, but he shouldn't be the main character. Renbachian guessed that the main character was still at the back. We want to take a look at the authenticity first, then we will discuss some issues, the middle-aged man said. The Empress and Renbachian looked at each other. In a split second, the Empress appeared 50 to 60 meters away and lifted her leg. Boom! There was a rumbling sound. Even through the screen, they could feel the ground trembling. The ground around the Empress, which was at least 200 to 300 square meters, was all cracked and the stones under the soil were protruding. Regardless of whether it was Chunshur, the other world, or the person on the other side of the screen, everyone was stunned. It was one thing to guess it, but another to see it with their own eyes. Regardless of whether it was appearing 50 to 60 meters away in a split second or the power of this kick, it was shocking. Especially the power of this kick. It didn't seem to cover a large area, but one had to remember that this was land. Normally, if this kick was very powerful, it would be like a pile driver directly nailing it into the ground. However, the Empress covered the entire area with her power, and used it on a single surface. Furthermore, it wasn't a flat surface that was pressed down, but the ground was uprooted. Just the method of using this power was already beyond imagination. Chapter 272. On the other side of the screen, although Renbachian could only see one person, there were actually many people watching this scene. It could be said that every one of them was a person of considerable status. After all, this matter was too important, and might even affect the future of mankind. Can I look at something else? The bespectacled middle-aged man on the screen pushed his spectacles up, and said slowly. Renbachian sneered. In the next second, a gun appeared in his hand and he pointed it at Chunshir's head. Sakuma drenched in ketchup, do you want to see it? The veins on Chunshir's forehead were throbbing. This guy really flipped out at the drop of a hat. The man on the screen was stunned at first, then his face turned angry. We are willing to display our strength, but it doesn't mean that you can casually make requests. Are you waiting to see the performance? Do you want to perform a duet for you to see? Renbachian sneered. In a place where the screen couldn't be seen, a few people almost spat out their tea. This guy's mouth was a little too poisonous. However, such a reaction was very normal. After all, that woman might be a so-called immortal cultivator. It would be strange if she was easy to talk to. The difference in strength allowed her to completely look down on ordinary people. Why don't we talk to someone else? The person behind you. At least show your face, right? Otherwise, I don't even know who I'm talking to, right? Renbachian asked again. After Renbachian finished speaking, he waited for the response from the screen. In a faraway room, an old man put down his teacup and nodded to the person beside him. Connect it. After a while, the screen went dark. When it lit up again, the people and environment in the screen had changed. An old man sat on a chair and nodded slightly toward the screen. Hello, big boss. Renbachian put the gun behind him, and immediately had a radiant look on his face. This was a real big boss. He had seen him on television more than once. Mr. Ren, I don't know how you would like us to address you. Let's call you this first. The old man smiled. His voice was very slow and his tone was very amiable. We have reached a consensus on the matter of cooperation. In that case, let's discuss on the basis of cooperation and seek common ground while reserving differences. We have some ideas, and Mr. Ren, you should also have your requests. Both sides should state them. This is the basis of communication, right? Renbachian applauded. As expected of a big shot, the way he spoke was different. He immediately set the tone. First of all, I want to ask a question. It doesn't affect our cooperation, but I want to understand something on the basis of our cooperation. Was there anyone else like Ms. Qi? Is it just her, or are there others? Renbachian thought about it, and felt that the other party's question was very sharp. The problem affected a wide range of areas. If there was only the Empress, why wasn't there anyone else? Since she could do it, why couldn't others? If there really was a legendary immortal cultivator, how could there only be one person? If there were others, where were they? What was his relationship with the Empress? Would they appear? These answers could affect the other party's attitude and approach in many aspects of cooperation. At this point in time, there were still many people watching the screen from a place where Renbachian couldn't see. They were carefully observing any of his subtle movements to determine some things. It's not just one person, Renbachian replied after careful consideration. As soon as he said that, many people's spirits were lifted. Some people who were watching him said, "It's almost true." They were all professionals, but they wouldn't say whether Renbachian's words were true or false. Instead, they would say it was almost true or not to provide a reference. After all, observing a person's expression and some subtle movements couldn't really tell. This was especially true for those who had undergone specialized training. What level is Ms. Qi's strength at? It's considered high, Renbachian replied. Logically speaking, she should be at the top. However, he hadn't forgotten something. It was that the former emperor led a group of people and left after attaining longevity heaven. Why did they leave? Where did they go? Great Xia had been founded for 70 years. Logically speaking, the first emperor was still far from reaching the end of his lifespan. Were there still such people? Were they still alive? Renbachian didn't know any of these. There were still many secrets in that world that he hadn't come into contact with yet. It's almost true. Where are the others? How many people are there? The old man in the video asked another question. At this point, he was a little nervous. If these people appeared in this world, No one knew what kind of changes would occur. However, one thing was certain, and that was chaos. When many powerful people appeared in this world, would they abide by the laws? Even a fool would know that it was impossible. They would only abide by some of their own rules, and wouldn't care about the laws of the world. A paradise, Renbachian exclaimed. In fact, he suddenly felt that the so-called paradise in the Taoist classics might not be any different from the other world. However, there was a big difference. Even the Blessed Enclave had entrances and exits. The other world was related to the mystery of his travel. Although it was just a change of words, it already gave people a different feeling. After all, the paradise had always been associated with the so-called immortals. It's almost true. It's almost false. Some people felt that Renbachian's answer was more true, while others felt that it was false. However, more people felt that it was true. As for how many people there are, you don't have to think too much about it. They won't come here. This is because it's very difficult for them to come here, and they need to fulfill an important condition. I don't need to say anything else. Renbachian's words were all true, but he concealed some things. It's almost true. In that case, can ordinary people go to the so-called paradise? No. Following that, the other party asked a lot of questions about the paradise, the cooperation between the two parties, and a question that everyone was very concerned about, whether the so-called martial arts could really help one live forever. It's impossible to live forever, but it's possible to prolong one's life. When one's cultivation reaches a certain level, one can live for 200 to 300 years, or even longer. Renbachian's words made many people excited. Lifespan had always been the instinctive pursuit of intelligent life. With today's technological progress, there might be more ways to prolong one's life in 200 to 300 years. In that case, what requests do Mr. Ren and Madam Qi have? The old man finally asked. In fact, he still had some questions, but they weren't urgent and could be answered slowly in the future. He needed to digest and think about the content of this conversation. This isn't urgent. First, withdraw the wanted order, and then borrow 100 million euros. I'm out of money. Renbachian was excited. After talking for so long, he could finally ask for money. The old man's gaze froze for a moment, and then he laughed. The country's money belongs to the country. It's the people's tax money, not an individual's. The bank can grant you some loans, but remember that you have to pay them back. The old man smiled. Let's put this aside for the time being. When will Mr. Run return to China? Come to XX with Madam Qi and have a meal. My Europe tour hasn't ended yet. Renbachian had been a little wild recently, and wasn't in a hurry to return. In that case, let's wait for your early return. After all, there's still a lot to discuss about the cooperation. The old man nodded. Why are you going back for the new year? Renbachian said. He didn't go back for the new year last year. This year, his parents were so worried that he had to go back for the new year. When the laptop screen turned black, Renbachian turned to look at Chinshur and asked, how do we get a loan? By the way, help us apply for passports. We need them urgently. Chapter 273. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the screen. Hello Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year. Renbachian's voice came from the other end of the phone and surprised him. He was shocked by the content. It's good to know that you are fine. Be well outside and don't call home. Papa Ren said in a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt as if he had been struck by lightning when he recalled the news he had just heard. It's all right, don't overthink it. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore. Renbachian laughed heartily. What happened? Papa Ren was shocked. Wasn't he wanted for murder? Renbachian replied in a deep voice. Actually, I'm a spy. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang, and I happened to have dealings with them because of something. Of course, it wasn't illegal. So the police found me, and I thought it wasn't too dangerous, so I became an undercover police officer. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I'm clean. Renbachian's words stunned Papa Ren. Really? Papa Ren didn't want to think about some of the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding Rinpochian because he had dealings with them sounded wrong. But he was still willing to believe that what his son said was true. Of course it's real. Otherwise, would I dare to go back? Rinpochian replied. That's great, that's great. Papa Ren's lips were trembling, and he didn't know what to say. Rinpochian felt a little guilty. It's okay. I'll go back in 2 months. Where are you now? Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long, he finally dared to ask this question. I'm traveling in Europe. Wait, I'll show you the video. Rinpochian then turned on the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside the window. Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you. Papa Ren couldn't help but say as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. Understood. Go back as soon as possible and tell Mom not to worry, Rinpochian said. There won't be any more danger, right? Papa Ren asked again. He only hung up the phone after getting a definite answer. Rinpochian kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Chen Shi. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, You seem to be lying all the time recently. In the past 2 days, she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore, Rinpochian said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. Back then, people really called him an honest and cute little husband. That is my lost youth, as well as running under the setting sun. Rinpochian's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. In that case, let's go. Rinpochian bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. Pa. 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation between both parties, Chen Shi had a bitter look on his face as he arranged for someone to specially deal with the shopping bags in the suite of Rinpochian and the Empress. After Rinpochian and the Empress left the room, they disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Rinpochian and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Rinpochian's hand and returned to the couch. She lazily lay on it and looked around. The change between the two worlds, the relaxed feeling in that world, and the desolate feeling after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't subsided, and she didn't want to stay here for a while. Pour me some wine. With pleasure. Rinpochian chuckled and put down the 2 barrels in his hands. One barrel was ammonia water, and the other barrel was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to nurture basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done, and they couldn't bring everything from Earth. Since he went in and out of Yangxin Palace Hall every day, he knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine pot, and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Rinpochian filled it up again. Drink with me, the Empress said. Rinpochian poured himself a cup, gestured for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit, and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played, and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Rinpochian stretched out his hand and said, Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday. Rinpochian was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the two of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Rinpochian still hadn't forgotten that scene. The Empress's eyes curved, and she was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her identity made her disdain doing such things. Runbachian took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers and said, "Why don't you try it and see what it feels like?" The two of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Renbachian were about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Renbachian put one hand on the Empress's shoulder, and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a man's hands on her body. She was a little nervous, and all the hair on her body stood up. A completely unfamiliar feeling that she had never felt before attacked her heart. Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step. Renbachian comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming in her heart, and her ears turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the fifth most powerful expert in the world had disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Renbachian's shoulder and saw Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan at the door with their mouths wide open. Feeling nervous, the Empress subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Renbachian flew out and landed on the wall of Yangxin Palace Hall. An hour later, when Renbachian woke up, he found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain, and his head was hurting as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. "Since you are awake, have a good rest. Don't move around for the next 2 days," the Empress said faintly as she sat on a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Renbachian wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in cold sweat. What exactly happened? Renbachian was at a loss. How did he end up like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress and drank 2 glasses of wine with her. After that, he couldn't remember how he ended up like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 274. Those who have read 264 before can watch this again. Previously, I thought of a plot and casually added it. It was indeed inappropriate. After revising it, I posted this. I repeat, it's 264,264,264. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the phone. "Hello, Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year." Renbachian's voice came from the phone and surprised him. He was surprised by the content. "It's good to know that you're fine. Be well outside and don't call home," Papa Ren said with a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt like he was struck by lightning when he thought of the news he just heard. "I'm fine. Don't think too much. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore." Renbachian laughed heartily. "What happened?" Papa Ren was shocked. "Wasn't he wanted for murder?" Renbachian said in a deep voice. "Actually, I was undercover. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang. However, I happened to have dealings with them because of a certain matter. Of course, it wasn't illegal. Therefore, the police found me. I considered that it wasn't dangerous and became undercover. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I've cleared my name." Renbachian's words stunned Papa Ren. Really, Papa Ren didn't want to think about the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding of Renbachian, because he had dealings with them, felt wrong. However, he was still willing to believe what his son had said. "Of course it's true. Otherwise, how would I dare to go back?" Renbachian said. That's great, that's great." Papa Ren's lips trembled, and he didn't know what to say. Renbachian felt a little guilty. "It's fine. I'll go back in 2 months. Where are you now?" Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long, he finally dared to ask this question. "Traveling in Europe." "Wait, I'll video you." Renbachian then played the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside. "Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you, Papa Ren said as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. Understood. Go back as soon as possible. Tell my mother not to worry, Rinpoche said. There won't be any more danger, right? Papa Ren asked again, and hung up after getting a definite answer. Rinpoche kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Chen Shi. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, "You seem to be lying all the time recently." In the past 2 days, she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore, Rinpoche said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. Back then, people really called him an honest and cute little husband. That is my lost youth, as well as running under the setting sun. Rinpoche's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. In that case, let's go. Rinpoche bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. Pa. Rinpoche was speechless. 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation, Chen Shi resentfully arranged for someone to handle the shopping bags in the suite that Rinpoche and the Empress were staying in. After leaving the room, Rinpoche and the Empress disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Rinpoche and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Rinpoche's hand and returned to the couch. She lay on it lazily and looked around. The change between the two worlds, the relaxation in that world, and the coldness after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't faded, and she didn't want to stay here for a while. Pour some wine for me. With pleasure. Rinpoche chuckled and put down the 2 buckets in his hands. One of the 2 buckets was ammonia, and the other was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to develop basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done, and they couldn't bring everything from Earth either. After going in and out of Yangxin Palace Hall every day, Rinpoche knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine jug, and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Rinpoche filled it up again. "Drink with me," the Empress said. Rinpoche poured himself a cup, motioned for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played, and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Rinpoche stretched out his hand and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday." Rinpoche was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the two of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Rinpoche still hadn't forgotten that scene until now. The Empress's eyes curved. She was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her status made her disdain doing such things. Rinpoche took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers and said, "Why don't you give it a try and see how it feels?" The two of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Rinpoche looked about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Rinpoche put one hand on the Empress's shoulder and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a pair of men's hands on her body. She was a little nervous, and all the hair on her body stood on end. She had never felt this way before, and it was a completely unfamiliar feeling. Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step. Renbachian comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action, and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming around in her heart. Her ears had also turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the fifth most powerful expert in the world had completely disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Renbachian's shoulder and saw Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan at the door with their mouths wide open. The Empress was nervous and subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Renbachian immediately flew out and stuck to the wall of Yangxin Palace Hall. An hour later, Renbachian woke up and found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain, and his head was aching as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. Since you are awake, rest well. Don't move around for the next 2 days, the Empress said faintly from a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Renbachian wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. What exactly happened? Renbachian was at a loss. How did he become like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress. Then he drank 2 glasses of wine with the Empress. After that, he couldn't remember how he became like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 275. After lying in bed for 2 days and using a lot of precious herbs, Renbachian was finally able to get up and move around. Up until now, he still didn't know what exactly happened, but he knew the condition of his body. Many bones in his back and shoulder blades were cracked, and he almost had a concussion. It seemed like he was hit by a truck. But how could there be a truck in Yangxin Palace Hall? The only person who could do it was the Empress. However, when he asked this question, the Empress avoided it, and even her ears turned red. This made him even more curious about what happened that day. If he said that he angered the Empress after drinking and was beaten up by her, why did her ears turn red? She would only behave like this when she was shy. But what exactly happened? If he couldn't figure it out, he didn't want to think about it. The Empress wouldn't tell him either. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan should know, but they didn't say anything either. Even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't have thought that he would dance with the Empress, let alone cause a murder. When he was able to move a little, he asked someone to carry him to the empty space next to the training ground beside the palace, and told the people from the Ministry of Works about his plans for a school. In fact, it was just to erect a wall and build a few houses. In addition to the 3 houses for school, there was also a library for books and reading, and a laboratory. However, the first thing to do was to build the 3 houses. The rest could be done slowly. After another 2 days, Renbachian was finally able to move by himself. Although his body was still in pain, it wasn't a big deal. This world was indeed unique in terms of medicine, whether it was the black mud cream or the medicine this time. With his previous injuries, he would probably need at least a month to walk on Earth. 100 days to recover from a serious injury wasn't an exaggeration. When they returned to Earth, the 2 of them went directly to Spain and stayed there for 3 days. In fact, there was a place in Spain that Renbachian wanted to see. It was Barcelona's Celestial Beach. In the past, he only heard about it on the internet, and always wanted to see it. However, the weather wasn't right, and the Empress was beside him. The Empress almost flipped the table when she saw the bikini. If she saw Celestial Beach, Renbachian felt that he wouldn't have a good ending. You won't die if you don't court disaster. Renbachian deeply agreed with this wise saying of the ancients. This time, Renbachian brought along a set of glass laboratory utensils and glucose. Then he headed straight to the glass factory with his imperial bodyguards. As soon as he arrived at the glass factory, a burly man greeted him, Sir Ren. This burly man was called Jiaozhua, and he had been working for the imperial family. Previously, When the glass factory was being built, Ren Baqian and the Empress wanted him, and he was finally assigned to this position. This person had followed the caravan to the Yun Nation and Dayo a few times, and was literate. Furthermore, he was one of the few ancient race members who were more cautious and meticulous. He would be a pretty good helper. Of course, this cautiousness and meticulousness was only relative. In the beginning, it caused a lot of trouble. However, things had gotten better recently. How have you been recently? Is the color of the glass gone? Ren Baqian asked after getting off the horned cow. Sir Run, I was just about to report that the color of the glass is much lighter than before. I reckon that we will be able to produce colorless glass very soon. Jiao's was said with a joyful look on his face. Let's go take a look. Ren Baqian nodded slightly. A moment later, he saw a flat piece of glass placed in a room. Part of it was green in the past, while the other part was green now. Comparing the two pieces, one could see that the color was much lighter. Well done. Ren Baqian nodded. It's what I should do. Jiaozhua grinned. Have you made the molds that I asked you to make? Ren Baqian asked. Yes, and I have tried to make some of them. Jiaozhua opened the box at the side and revealed some glass cups. They were all classical cups and goblets, and their color was also a little green. Sir, if we bring these things to the Yun Nation and Great Xia, they can be sold for a high price, Jiaozhua said with a smile. Ren Baqian picked up two of them and looked at them carefully. He shook his head slightly and said, they are still a little rough. The thickness of the walls and the bottom of the cups aren't very uniform. Remake the molds and get the best craftsmen. Got it, sir. Jiaozhua had a look of regret in his eyes. He felt that the ones in the box were pretty good. However, they still weren't up to standard for Deputy Prefect Ren. Following which, Ren Baqian moved the box that contained the glassware out, and found a room to conduct the silver mirror reaction experiment. When Jiaozhua saw the glassware that Ren Baqian took out, he finally understood why Ren Baqian didn't like the glass cups that they made. The color of the bottles and jars that Ren Baqian took out was pure and transparent. There were almost no flaws, and the glass cups that they made could not be compared to them. For the next few days, Ren Baqian would go to the glass factory every day. Every day, he would use those glass bottles and jars to conduct experiments in that small room. He would mumble words like sodium hydroxide, silver nitrate, ammonia, and so on that no one could understand. From time to time, he would kick the wall in frustration. Hearing the angry screams from inside, the imperial bodyguards outside were already used to it. In any case, no matter what Ren Baqian was doing inside, they just didn't let anyone in to disturb him. After spending a few days and experiencing dozens of failures, Ren Baqian finally completed the silver mirror reaction experiment. For most people, this experiment could be completed in 2 hours. When he looked at the palm-sized mirror in his hand, his face was filled with joy. His chemistry teacher could finally rest in peace in the netherworld. After the first time, the second time would be much easier. Ren Baqian called a few craftsmen over, and taught them how to make the silver mirror step by step. In the afternoon, cries of "Ah! And why are you guys as stupid as pigs?" could be heard coming from the room again. Sir, what's a pig? Someone asked. Return to the city. Ren Baqian stormed out of the room with blue veins popping out on his forehead. Lu Pinghai should be here in the next few days, right? A handsome young man dressed in embroidered clothes asked while riding on a horse. Young master, this is the news. A middle-aged man with a long spear on his back replied. Looking at the young man beside him, there was a trace of regret in his eyes. The last descendant of the Yu family was actually a cripple in terms of cultivation. Unless he could get his hands on Lu Pinghai's spirit yuan pill. It was just that he didn't know if the item that he brought this time would make him relent. I will definitely succeed. Even Lu Pinghai will be tempted by this item. I will get the spirit yuan pill and take back what belongs to me, the young man said with a smile. In his eyes, there wasn't a trace of doubt on whether he could succeed or not. Everything that happened was God's way of training for me. I will definitely succeed. I will return the disdain and supercilious looks that those people gave me one by one. Uncle Ping, it has been hard on you all these years. If it wasn't for your kindness to the Yu family, I'm afraid I wouldn't be alive today, the young man sighed. It's my duty, the man addressed as Uncle Ping replied. You're an Earth Embryo Realm expert, and yet you're guarding a cripple like me. You don't know how many people are secretly cursing you, the young man said with a smile. If it wasn't for Uncle Ping, he wouldn't even be able to keep the last things that belonged to the Yu family. Uncle Ping smiled and didn't reply. When the two of them reached the outskirts of the village, the young man stopped and looked at it. It's really shabby. Then he turned to look at the forest at the side. That was where the grave of Lu Qi, Lu Pinghai's best friend, was. At this moment, Uncle Ping's expression suddenly changed. Young master, be careful. Before he finished his sentence, he had already appeared in front of the young man at lightning speed. The long spear on his back was already held horizontally in his hand, deflecting 2 incoming arrows. A surprised sound came from the forest. Then, 2 burly men who looked exactly the same walked out from the forest. You're the third batch. Aboriginals. Uncle Ping's expression changed. The other party should have the same purpose as him. As for the other party saying that he was the third batch, there was no need to ask about the whereabouts of the previous 2 batches. Do you want to do it, or should I? The 2 Aboriginal men looked at each other. Rock, paper, scissors. Uncle Ping's face turned red. No matter what, he was still an Earth Embryo Realm expert. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Come. The limit is 10 moves. If you don't die, I'll let you go. One of the burly men walked out with an expression as if he had won a prize. He looked at the broadsword in the other party's hand. It looked like the standard broadsword of Dayo, but it was longer and thicker. Young master, step back first, Uncle Ping said in a deep voice. He didn't doubt the other party's words. Once the Aboriginals made a promise, they wouldn't go back on it. As long as he could withstand 10 moves from the other party, he was still confident in his strength. The other party had underestimated him. He had a move that had never failed before. Those who had seen it before were all dead. Unfortunately, there were 2 opponents this time, and he could only use that move once. 2 minutes later, the burly man spat at the corpse in front of him. Then he punched the sorrowful young man to death. He then dragged the 2 corpses into the forest. What's this? It looks like something good. A voice came from the forest. Keep it. I'll show it to the great general when I get back. Chapter 276. In the Eastern Sea, an old man in green robes stopped outside a small fishing village. The old man had nothing on him other than a flute at his waist and a jar of wine in his hand. Looking at the somewhat dilapidated village, the elder's gaze was filled with sorrow and nostalgia, as well as reminiscing about the years that had passed. In the blink of an eye, so many years had passed. I'm afraid that in a few years, this village will no longer exist. The old man stood outside the village for a long time before turning around and walking towards a small forest nearby. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. Come out, the old man said in a deep voice. As soon as the old man's voice fell, 2 men wearing coarse clothes walked out from the small forest in front of them. They had the same face, the same height, the same sturdy body, the same bald head, and the simple expression on their faces. Just by looking at their faces, they gave people the impression that they were simple men from the mountains. However, the long sabers on their shoulders gave them an austere aura. 8th in the world, Lu Pinghai. We 2 brothers have been waiting for you for a long time. The 2 of them spoke at the same time, their voices somewhat muffled. Lu Pinghai looked at the 2 of them without moving his brows. Aboriginals rarely appeared in the other nations, but they had specifically come here. It was unknown whose orders they were under. His Majesty said that he wants to exchange a primary spirit elixir with you. You can name your conditions, the 2 continued. True enough. Lu Pinghai suddenly realized that it was Qi Zixiao. Tell Qi Zixiao that I don't want anything. You can go back. Lu Pinghai shook his head. Her Majesty said that if you don't agree, she will look for you personally, the 2 of them said. The Empress actually said that if Ren Baqian didn't agree, she would beat him to death. But if he said that, Lu Pinghai would probably turn hostile on the spot. No matter what, he was still ranked 8th in the world. How could he allow others to threaten him like this? Then let Qi Zixiao come and find me. Lu Pinghai laughed and walked past the two of them, not even sparing them a glance. Although Qi Zixiao was ranked 5th in the world, and there was also Hong Wu, who was ranked 9th in the world, he was not afraid of them. As the 8th most powerful expert in the world, he definitely had his own confidence. If they hadn't fought, who knew what would happen? Qi Zixiao was originally ranked 7th, but didn't he also kill the 5th Hua Sanlu? How could he not have any trump cards? Lu Pinghai, do you really want to offend His Majesty for a primary spirit, Dan? Both of them turned around, their hands already on their blades. Although Qi Zixiao is powerful, she won't make me hand over my things just because of her words. Today, for Qi Zixiao's sake, I'll let you two leave. Don't act recklessly. Lu Pinghai coldly snorted and swung his sleeves behind him. Immediately, his sleeves extended several meters like snakes and coiled around the hilts of the two sabers. Clang! The two of them unsheathed their long sabers and slashed at their sleeves. However, a sudden force came from the sleeves and pushed the sabers away. The two long sabers slashed at their own necks. Roar! The two of them lowered their heads at the same time, their blades crisscrossing as they slashed at each other's sleeves. However, they missed. The sleeve loosened its grip on the saber hilt, as if it was a living thing, then heavily struck the two men's chests. The two men could not help but fall back. They only stopped after retreating 7 or 8 steps. Blood flowed from the corner of their mouths. Lu Pinghai was surprised. Even an expert who had just attained the spirit will level wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack, let alone a direct hit on their chests. Yet the two of them were still standing there. The Aboriginals really had a lot of experts, and they were already this strong with just 2 people sent out. It's not easy to cultivate. I'll let you two off today. Lu Pinghai left these words and disappeared into the forest. The two men looked at each other, turned around and left. Since the two of them were no match for him, they had to go back and tell the general about Lu Pinghai's rejection. Lu Pinghai entered the forest, went straight to his residence, and finally sat down in an open space. His old friend had lived here for decades, but now, he couldn't even find his grave. However, this was also good since no one would disturb him. He knew where Run Baqian lived even with his eyes closed. I'm back to see you again. Lu Pinghai opened the wine gourd, drank a mouthful, and sprinkled a little on the ground. He looked at the silver mirror in his hand, and then at the craftsman and Jiao Zhua in front of him. How many days did it take for you to make this silver mirror? How stupid are you? Even a dark-faced man is smarter than you. A dark-faced man was a nickname for a wild boar. 2 days. Run Baqian squinted at the craftsman who answered him. Even a black-faced man would be able to make these things in 2 days. The craftsmen lowered their heads and listened to him quietly. A row of tall and burly men stood there with their heads lowered like a wall. Run Baqian nagged for a long time before finally saying, each of you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver, and your monthly allowance will be increased by 1 level. Even though these people were hopelessly stupid, they still managed to do it. They should be scolded and rewarded. Thank you, sir. Everyone immediately put on a smile. 10 taels of silver was equivalent to more than 2 months of their monthly allowance. Furthermore, their monthly allowance would be increased by 1 level, which was a lot of money. All of you may leave. Ren Baqian let the craftsman leave first and then instructed Jiao Zhua on the main tasks. At this moment, the most important ones were concave and flat mirrors, which were used to make solar furnaces. After these were completed and the Mount Damo iron ore mine was settled, they could then sell it to other countries through caravans to make money. For the next period of time, Ren Baqian woke up in the morning and went to the glass factory. At noon, he returned to the palace and practiced martial arts in the afternoon. After the problems with the glass and silver plating were solved, the next step was much smoother. Even though the production speed of the glass factory wasn't fast, it was much faster than when they first started. The ratio of the materials had also been found, and the number of problems had decreased. After a week, the concave and silver mirrors had already filled 2 rooms. Next, Ren Baqian led the craftsmen to the glass factory every day to use wood and rattan to make square shelves. The shelves were also concave. Then the mirrors were fixed on the shelves. A few days later, in the afternoon, a convoy of more than 100 people majestically left Lan City and headed straight for the glass factory outside the city. However, they didn't enter the newly built brick building. Instead, they went to an open space beside the glass factory. At this moment, there was a wooden platform there. On top of the platform, there was a huge shelf that was 6 meters tall and 12 meters wide. On top of the shelf were concave mirrors. From a distance, it was dazzling and blinding. Many people covered their eyes with their hands to block the white light. The Empress came down from the carriage. Behind her were Shiqing, Zhizhihai, Tuwan, Tong Zhinya, Qin Chuan, and the other high-ranking officials from the 6 ministries. As long as they were free, they were pulled over by the Empress. Everyone was guessing what the Empress wanted to see by calling so many people over. At this moment, when they saw the distorted scenery reflected in the concave mirrors on the tall shelf, Shiqing, Zhikohai, Tong Zhinya, and the others immediately knew what it was. It was just that they didn't know if it was like what Deputy Prefect Ren said. If it was, it would be a joyous occasion. The others looked at the large mirror in front of them with curiosity. Is that a mirror? I don't know what it is made of. It doesn't look like a bronze mirror, but it's actually so bright. But the reflection doesn't seem to be moving. Look at the stone in the mirror, it's deformed. Hey, look at the person reflected in the mirror. His body is so short. I'm dying of laughter. The Empress looked at the large mirror in front of her. After sizing it up for a moment, she said to Ren Baqian, "You can start now." Ren Baqian looked very relaxed. After such a long time, he had finally made this. Now was the time to showcase it. He hoped that this bunch of idiots wouldn't mess it up. Following his greeting, 30 guards who were usually in charge of his arrangements ran to one side and carried out 30 mirrors that were 2 meters long and 1 meter tall. Then they placed them on the ground in front of the shelf. Following which, someone carried out a 4 meters long iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl and placed it on the ground. Ren Baqian walked to the front of the 30 mirrors and adjusted the angle of one of them to reflect the sunlight onto the concave mirror on the shelf. Then, after the concave mirror focused the sunlight onto the top of the iron pillar. After he adjusted the angle, the others followed his movements and began to adjust the mirror. From time to time, Ren Baqian helped everyone adjust the mirror. At the beginning, many people had their eyes on him. However, as the Empress, Shiqing, and the others stared at the top of the iron pillar, more and more people looked over. They were doubtful about what they could see. But immediately, they got a huge shock. The top of the iron pillar suddenly burst into flames for no reason. One had to know that this was an iron pillar. Everyone wasn't blind. From the footsteps of the person carrying the iron pillar, and the way it stood up, it was definitely an iron pillar. But how could an iron pillar catch fire? Something even more surprising happened. Not only was the top of the iron pillar on fire, but it was also melting. Dark red molten iron flowed down the body of the pillar. Very quickly, the top of the iron pillar was missing a chunk. Not only were those who saw it for the first time shocked, even Shiqing and the others were surprised. Previously, it was only a round plate that burned a hole in a steel saber. Now it melted an iron rod that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl. The difficulty was more than 10 times or even 100 times greater. Therefore, when they personally saw the effect, they were all shocked. I congratulate Your Majesty and Dayo. Deputy Prefect Ren has made a great contribution by making this item. Within 100 years, Dayo will no longer have to worry about a shortage of iron. Shiqing said loudly with a face full of joy. Following his words, everyone reacted and congratulated Her Majesty one after another. Although they didn't know what happened, they understood one thing. That iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl had been melted. In that case, Mount Damo's iron mine would soon have a steady stream of fine iron ore. They would no longer have to worry about the lack of military equipment. This was indeed a joyous occasion, And Ren Baqian, who had contributed the most to this matter, had a higher status in the hearts of many people. Previously, when Her Majesty said that she wanted him to set up an academy, everyone didn't take it too seriously. Many people didn't even consider it. In the future, if Her Majesty asked about it, they would say that even though the disciples in their family were not talented enough, they just needed to focus on practicing martial arts. However, from the looks of it now, this person really had some capabilities. Chapter 277. On the second floor of a restaurant on Jingyang Avenue near Beihong District, more than 10 young men and women were sitting around 2 tables. Have you heard that Her Majesty wants to open an educational institute? A tall and burly youth who was about 16 or 17 years old said while drinking at the table. Ren Baqian is in charge. Another youth casually said. Humph. The one who spoke was a beautiful young girl who was about 17 or 18 years old. She slammed her bowl on the table. The others looked at her and laughed mischievously, but they didn't restrain themselves. This young girl was called Lu Yueyao. She suffered a big loss during the Great Hunt, and was verbally abused by Ren Baqian. In the end, everyone had no choice but to stand up and target her. After that, she received 10 lashes and was grounded for a month as punishment. Originally, she wanted to find an opportunity to take revenge after she was released. However, after staying at home for a few days, she heard a piece of news that made her dumbstruck. That pretty boy who only knew how to talk was actually chosen as the Empress's future husband. She couldn't figure out what Her Majesty saw in that kid. Her Majesty wasn't only the Empress, but she was also the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Her beauty was enough to enchant countless people. However, such a person actually chose that kid as her husband. This almost made her smash everything in the room. As time went by, her hatred for Ren Baqian didn't diminish at all. Instead, it intensified. Every time she heard news about Ren Baqian, she would feel unhappy. However, the others didn't care much about her feelings. Instead, they chatted about the Educational Institute. What does an educational institute teach? This wasn't something that only one person wanted to know. Educational institutes were still new in Dayo. It should be the same as Great Xia. They teach calligraphy, mathematics, military strategy, and law. Someone said with certainty. Maybe there's even Confucian classics. Someone laughed. That's hard to say, someone replied. Confucian classics was the general name for several doctrines that were passed down a long time ago. They mainly taught people to be kind, how to discipline themselves, and how to think about heaven and earth, society and people and nature. It was the main doctrine in Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chen nation. However, the aboriginals didn't like it, let alone the descendants of the officials. In Dayo, the fist was the hard truth. Although there were laws, in most people's hearts, fists were the most important. Everyone put this matter aside after discussing for a while. Besides practicing martial arts, these young people would at most read a few books at home. They would also call their friends to have fun outside, and occasionally talk about the happenings in Lon City. For example, the matter of the Black Star Academy. Everyone just casually talked about it, and no one took it too seriously. It was also impossible for them to enter any school. Everyone knew that only those who were not particularly talented would go. Ren Baqian was sitting in Yangxin Palace Hall with a list of names given to him by the Empress. On it were the names of the students who were sent by the court officials to enter the academy. Shirgan, don't tell me he's the grandson of the Great Elder? Ren Baqian casually asked when he saw the first name. It's his youngest son, the Empress said faintly. Pooh. Great Elder is indeed young at heart despite his age, Ren Baqian exclaimed. The Great Elder should be at least 70 or 80 years old, right? It was written that Shirgan was 12 years old, which meant that the Great Elder was still having a son when he was 60 or 70 years old. Ren Baqian continued to read and immediately saw a familiar name. Tong Lan, 10 years old. This little girl's innate talent isn't good? Ren Baqian was shocked. She was only 10 years old, yet she kept telling him why flowers were so red, and that her innate talent wasn't good? Tong Lan's innate talent is pretty good. At least it's better than her grandfather, the Empress said. Didn't they say that all the students are good-for-nothings with poor innate talent? Ren Baqian pointed at the name list and questioned. Tong Jinya said that since she's still young, She can stay in the academy for 2 years and consider it as finding a playmate. The Empress plucked a grape and threw it into her mouth. Renbaqian was speechless. Do you think this is a kindergarten? However, after thinking about it, he had suffered so many losses in the hands of that girl and suffered so many beatings. This was a good opportunity for him to take revenge. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. As for the thought of letting her off because she was a delicious Lolita, Renbaqian extinguished it before it could even form in his mind. If you don't take revenge, you're not a gentleman. A great man can't be ruthless. These were the words of the ancestor, and he couldn't forget them. Renbaqian grinned and laughed. The Empress took another look at him and rolled her eyes. She could roughly guess what Renbaqian was thinking at this moment. However, that girl Tonglan was very crafty. At that time, it was uncertain who would be torturing who. Renbaqian looked at the names on the list. There were a total of 31 people, which was about what he expected. He could only teach these disciples by himself. However, after thinking about it, Renbaqian said, "Can you recruit a few from the commoners? They can stay in the academy as teachers in the future." After all, these were the children of the big shots in the imperial court. In the future, they would most likely become officials in various places. He couldn't possibly be the only one teaching them, right? All right. The Empress nodded her head. But have you thought of a name? Lanxiang Academy. Renbaqian looked serious. Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to twitch, Renbaqian immediately changed his tune and said, "I'm joking. Actually, it's called New East." Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to emit a murderous aura, Renbaqian changed his tune again and said, "Actually, this is also a joke. Let's call it Black Bamboo Academy. A few days ago, I saw a few purple bamboos in a small bamboo forest nearby." The Empress was more or less satisfied when she heard this name. She continued to eat her grapes and ignored Renbaqian. "It's going to be New Year in a month, right? Are there any activities for New Year? After that, the academy will start the enrollment," Renbaqian asked. He still didn't know how to celebrate New Year in Dayo. "Yes, lantern grabbing," the Empress explained. In the past, it was limited to young people below the age of 20, and the winners will be rewarded. If the others perform well, they will also be favored by the girls in the villages. If you want to participate, I can give you special permission to participate. If you perform well, I might even reward you," the Empress said with a smile on her face. "What rules?" Renbaqian was immediately excited. "First, build a frame and hang the lantern on it. The participants will be divided into groups of 10, and can choose their own people. The person who grabs the lantern first wins." The Empress's eyes were full of smiles. "Don't tell me I can fight against the others?" Renbaqian immediately laughed dryly. "Of course, this is the time to show off your skills," the Empress said as a matter of course. "Forget it then." Renbaqian immediately rejected her. He couldn't even beat a 10-year-old Lolita, so he would be courting death if he participated. "Don't you want to hear about my reward?" The Empress's tone carried a rare gentleness that made Renbaqian's heart flutter. However, he immediately shook his head like a rattledrum and said, "I'm a man and I won't participate if I say I won't." Since the Empress had spoken like this, it definitely wasn't anything good. There was a huge pit ahead, and only a fool would jump into it. "I can give you a kiss." The Empress's voice was so soft that Renbaqian could hear her clearly. Upon hearing this, Renbaqian suddenly raised his head and looked at the Empress. Her face was flushed, and her shy look made Renbaqian feel as if there was a pile driver in his chest. Renbaqian put on a righteous face and said, "I feel that death is inevitable. It can be as heavy as Mount Tai or as light as a goose feather. I will die without regrets for your majesty." Then he changed the topic and said helplessly, "It's not that I'm unwilling to participate in the lantern grabbing contest, but I've been afraid of heights since I was young and can't climb high. Therefore, even though I feel pain, I have no choice but to give up." Chapter 278. On a plane flying from Tokyo to Shanghai, Renbaqian looked at the Empress who had thrown a tantrum for a few days and sighed. I think I'd better participate in the lantern-grabbing event. Even though I have a serious fear of heights, a real man has his limits." The Empress tilted her head, looked at him from the corner of her eyes, and then turned to look at the scenery outside. The Empress had been throwing a tantrum for a few days. She didn't say a word and only rolled her eyes when she saw him. She wasn't like the cold and aloof Empress at all. This was the first time such a situation had happened to the Empress. At first, he felt that the Empress was quite amusing, but after a long time, it wasn't so fun anymore. In fact, Renbachian had some guesses in his heart. Could it be that the Empress had come to visit her? This was because the Empress would occasionally reveal such a feminine side, which was very different from her usual self. Other women had good tempers most of the time, but there would always be a few days a month when they were not normal and had a terrible temper. On the other hand, the Empress was cold and aloof most of the time. Every month, she would be abnormal and very feminine. The more Renbachian thought about it, the more he felt that this possibility was not small. As the saying went, there must be something wrong with something abnormal. Renbachian reached out and grabbed the Empress's hand. It was very soft and warm. He was relieved that he didn't feel the expected paw, and the pain didn't come. These few days, he had also asked people about the lantern-grabbing event and more or less understood it. Just like what the Empress said, the lantern-grabbing event was divided into groups of 10. 9 of them were there to protect the commander. The participating groups could also attack other groups. Even though they couldn't be heavy-handed, there would be serious injuries every year. Fortunately, the Aboriginals had thick skin and flesh, so there wouldn't be any deaths. Also, both parties couldn't use weapons, but they could wear armor. Generally, it was leather armor. It wasn't very useful, but it had some protective effect. This gave Renbachian some ideas. Since they could wear armor, was there a limit to leather or iron armor? He could make a full body armor with steel spikes and make himself look like a hedgehog. Who would dare to touch him then? When the time came, he just had to bump into the crowd. It was decided. When the plane landed, Renbachian held the Empress's hand and walked out of the cabin. They froze like dogs. The two of them had just come back from Hawaii. They had changed planes in Japan and had specially bought 2 thick coats. However, it was still very cold when they came out. So cold, Renbachian tightened his clothes with one hand and pulled the Empress's hand with the other. They followed the crowd and walked forward. But he was finally back. It had been almost half a year. When he escaped, it was the end of June and the beginning of July. Now it was the last day of December. Tomorrow would be the new year. Mr. Run. Renbachian was stopped the moment he stepped out of the airport. The other party was a man in his 30s, and there was a man and a woman beside him. There's actually a plane to pick me up. This treatment is a little beyond the norm. Renbachian laughed. It looks familiar. I think I've seen it before. Yes, I was even shot by Mr. Run before. The other party said with a face full of hidden bitterness. It was just a joke. Don't be offended. Actually, I have a lot of respect for people like you who work for the country. Renbachian immediately knew who it was. He laughed and directly brushed the matter aside. All 3 looked askance at him. Respect? Sorry, they really couldn't tell. Both of you, please. The 3 of them didn't say anything else. There were 2 cars waiting outside. Renbachian and the Empress got into the car at the back while the middle-aged man sat in the front passenger seat. Renbachian held the Empress's hand along the way. In any case, as long as there wasn't a paw. He wasn't prepared to let go and was prepared to hold her hand until next year. 2 hours later, the car entered the underground parking lot of a building, and the few of them alighted. After entering the elevator, the Empress lowered her head and looked at the hand that Renbachian was still holding. Pa. Renbachian looked at his hand that was swollen like a pig's trotter and said seriously, "It's a little thicker and rounder than last time. I might have put on weight recently." The 3 of them looked askance at him, and inexplicably felt that they had been showered with dog food. When they got out of the elevator, there were already people waiting outside. 5 or 6 men and women in suits were waiting at the entrance. The one in front said rather enthusiastically, "Mr. Run, Madam Chi, you are finally back." Those who didn't know would think that the 2 of them had gone overseas to study. The other party was a newly established department with a huge research team behind them. They were prepared to study the things that Rinpoche had brought out. For the next half of the day, they discussed in detail about some cooperation matters. The previous time was just a preliminary agreement between both parties. This time, it was official. First of all, Rinpoche couldn't be as reckless as before. At least, he still had to abide by the country's laws. He couldn't be reckless just because of his special status. With regards to this, Rinpoche didn't have any objections. If no one provoked him, he wouldn't create trouble for no reason anyway. However, Rinpoche asked for the identities of the two secret departments, which was the department that Chen Shi was in. In the future, it would be easier to deal with matters outside. At the very least, they could scare off a lot of trouble if they encountered any problems. Originally, the other party wanted to give Rinpoche and Qi Zixiao a nominal position in the army, but was rejected by Rinpoche. If that was the case, the two of them would be tied together. After that, they added some details about the cooperation. For example, if the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back were to be studied, how would they be distributed? Generally speaking, the country would take the majority. However, Rinpoche had the right to know. There was no reason for him to be kept in the dark about the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back. Furthermore, some of the research results could be converted into commercial applications. Both parties added some details in this area. For this matter, Rinpoche couldn't possibly ask a lawyer for help. It was entirely up to him. He didn't know if he would be at a disadvantage or benefiting from some aspects. After half a day, both parties understood some of the ideas of the other party and reached a partial agreement. In the end, Rinpoche felt that his brain was hurting. It was too troublesome to talk to these people because it was all about minor details. However, this was something that had to be done. If these things weren't explained clearly, who knew what certain people would do in the future? Especially after 10, 20 or 30 years, no one could say for sure what the current leaders would think. For most people, there wasn't a need to consider so much. However, for Rinpoche, 30 years on Earth was equivalent to 15 years. Finally, both parties reached a memorandum of understanding. As for a contract, it was impossible to have one. The Empress sat there in a daze the entire time. She wasn't the least bit interested in such matters. After that, Rinpoche took out some things that he brought along. A bottle of soil, a bottle that contained an outstanding little white flower that he picked from the garden, and a piece of stone. These things looked ordinary, but they were the foundation of a world. From these things, it might be possible to see the differences between Earth and that world. The other party immediately arranged for people to keep these things. Mr. Run, we need something more special. The person who spoke was Yang Sun, the head of the newly established department called Messier 87. Messier 87 was a galaxy located in the constellation Virgo. This name also implied another world. From this, it could be seen that some people regarded the so-called paradise as a completely different world. After all, in the theory of Taoism, the paradise was located in the space of the big world. As a result, they had various kinds of connections with our world. At the same time, due to the relative isolation of their existence, the paradise had its own unique space-time structure. Therefore, the paradise could be said to be another world. However, Rinpoche felt that the person who came up with this name had probably seen too much Ultraman. Research always has to start from the basics. I also want to know what these basics are different from each other. I will bring some more things over a period of time, and some of them will be what you want, Rinpoche said. It's a pleasure working with you. The other party nodded. They also wanted to know what Rinpoche wanted to know. Since Rinpoche said that he would bring more things over a period of time, it was fine. You can contact me if there's anything. Yang Sun handed a business card without a name to Rinpoche. I will try my best to help you settle some things within my capabilities. However, breaking the law doesn't count. That night, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand at the bund and looked at the 4D lights in the sky. The gorgeous colors shone on everyone. There were young people everywhere, and most of the cold wind was blocked by the people around them. As time passed, the surrounding atmosphere became more and more enthusiastic. 60 seconds, 59, 58. As the countdown began, this year had come to an end. Rinpoche held the Empress's hands at the right time and stood opposite her. 10, 9, 8. As the last 10 seconds passed, many couples around them shouted while holding hands or hugging each other. In the last few seconds, many people wanted to leave a kiss that crossed the new year. Rinpoche stared into the Empress's eyes and saw that her gaze was like the surface of a lake. Her face was slightly bashful. Rinpoche moved his mouth closer to hers when the last 3, 2, 1 resounded. This was such a good opportunity. What if the Empress was infected by this atmosphere? Rinpoche thought to himself. The Empress's body shrank back a little. Then, she subconsciously raised her hand and lightly hammered Rinpoche's chest. This action was very common on television, and the Empress had seen it many times. Chapter 279. How does it feel to have a girlfriend who is highly skilled in martial arts? Rinpoche did not know if anyone had considered this question, but he felt that he was qualified to answer. It was probably similar to dating a road roller. If you were not careful, you would be buried in the ground. This was risking your life to date. After a week, he finally got out of bed. He felt that he was going to have a psychological scar. However, he had to thank the super strong ointment from the other world. Now he still remembered Yang Sen's surprised expression when he visited the hospital. He really could not imagine how he became like this. His sternum and 2 ribs were fractured, and it was similar to being hit by a car. However, at that time, Rinpoche was in the crowd at the Bund. Thus, the only person who could cause harm to him was Qi Zixiao, who went in and out with him. After hearing the news, many people guessed whether Rinpoche and Qi Zixiao had a conflict, and whether it would affect their cooperation. However, Qi Zixiao did not leave Rinpoche's bedside for the next few days with an apologetic look on her face, until someone raised the question of whether it was domestic violence. However, no one asked Rinpoche for confirmation. They only felt pity when they thought of him. Naturally, Rinpoche was embarrassed to say that he was bashfully punched in the chest by the Empress. However, there was one thing that he understood. If he did not want to risk his life to get married and the Empress would become a widow, he had to improve his strength. However, the Empress's attitude was not right these few days. Although it was not very obvious, he could feel it. He also knew what the reason was. When he arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, he saw the Empress in a daze. He did not know what she was thinking about, and there was a wine flask beside her. After seeing Rinpoche, the Empress regained her original cold expression. However, there was some guilt in her eyes. It was very similar to the look she had when Rinpoche received a concussion. Although she could control her strength most of the time, Rinpoche was really too weak. Especially when she could not maintain her calm. There were more and more emotions in her heart. If he wasn't paying attention, he might be seriously injured. Zixiao. Rinpoche stepped forward and held the Empress's hand. The Empress retracted her hand slightly, and Rinpoche grabbed it. People will get used to some things bit by bit, Rinpoche said softly and held the Empress's hand in both of his palms. He secretly added in his heart, "This does not include being seriously injured. Don't worry too much. Many things will happen naturally. I'm afraid that one day, I'll have to personally bury you in the garden," the Empress said faintly. Her voice was a little cold, and the contents of her words were chilling. Rinpoche knew that she was just feeling a little guilty, so there was a little resistance in her heart. She was afraid of hurting something. In other words, he was timid. The female Empress's heart was in a mess these few days. She did not know what she was feeling right now. In all these years, this was the first time she had felt this way. She was a little upset. It was the same feeling as before. This was the first time his heart was beating fast. The first time his heart felt like it was being pounded by an elephant. The first time he felt guilty. The first time he felt timid. "I trust that you will control your power." Looking at this hand, it was beautiful, soft, and warm. It made one want to hold it forever. Even though it's very powerful, it's not meant to harm anything. Renbachian held the Empress's hand and spoke in a very warm voice. The Empress allowed Renbachian to hold her hand, and her heart was beating very fast. Renbachian gently kissed the Empress's finger. As if she had been electrocuted, her whole body trembled slightly. The coldness that had just been restored immediately melted like ice and snow. Renbachian felt that the success rate of kissing her now was very high. However, there was a saying that went, "You won't die if you don't court death." Before reaching the manual level, Renbachian felt that his small body would not be able to take a hit. It was better not to do anything too dangerous. Don't think too much. Renbachian straightened his body and smiled. We should set off now. A lot of people should be waiting anxiously. The Empress looked at him, wrinkled her nose slightly, and let out a soft humph. It sounded like a little girl raising her head proudly and making a sound. Renbachian knew that the Empress had recovered when he heard this sound. A few hours later, Renbachian and the Empress appeared in that building again. Mr. Ren, you recovered very quickly. Young Sun was a little surprised. It had only been half a month, but it seemed like there were no major problems. Do you want to do a more detailed examination? No need. Renbachian waved his hand. Don't try to trick me into letting you guys study me. Young Sun felt a little regretful. At present, both parties were in the early stages of cooperation, and were more cautious. How's the previous one? Renbachian asked. Soon after, he saw a stack of printed reports. Most of the composition is still the same, but there are many microorganisms that I have never seen before. Some of them died after leaving the soil, and some of them have undergone some changes. We need more time to find out more, Young Sun explained briefly. However, the common iron and calcium content in the soil is very low, and the content of titanium and potassium is higher. It could be seen that Young Sun was very concerned about the research progress in this area, and he almost blurted it out. Renbachian roughly glanced at the report and put it back on the table. Let's go to the laboratory to take a look. You guys will be interested in the things that I brought this time. Renbachian was very confident because he had brought the elongation saber this time. After all, they had just started working together, and he had to bring something of great value. Although there were many valuable things in that world, for example, anything from the Kirin's body, such as the cloud crystal, which was also very precious in that world. However, after thinking about it, he still brought the elongation saber over. The elongation saber's characteristics were great enough. Whether it was growth or mental control, it was enough to shock everyone. This thing wasn't very useful in his hands, but in the hands of the nation, it could be used to research a lot of valuable things. At the same time, he also wanted to know if this saber still hid any secrets. However, he didn't have the conditions or the time to experiment. He might as well bring it over. Perhaps there would be some additional gains during the research process. When Yang Sun heard what Renbachian said, a trace of joy appeared on his face. The things that Renbachian brought over previously were indeed slightly different from those on Earth, but their current value wasn't considered high. One had to know that Earth was a paradise. How could some things like soil be able to satisfy people? Accompanied by Yang Sun and 2 guards, the 2 of them entered the elevator and went all the way down to the basement. There were a few floors above this building, and they were the exposed parts. The important places were in the 3 floors below ground level. After exiting the elevator and passing through 2 doors, they were greeted by a vast expanse of green. It was as if they had suddenly arrived in a forest, and above them was a blue sky. Renbachian could tell that something wasn't right at first glance. He stretched out his hand to touch it and realized that it was actually a wall. The forest was fake, and presumably, the sky above them was also fake. The Empress also touched it and didn't care anymore. She thought that the surroundings were made of glass. This is a new technology that hasn't been applied in the commercial market yet, Yang Sun said simply. Subsequently, they came to a laboratory that was filled with tempered glass partitions, various instruments and computers. It was similar to what Renbachian had imagined. After taking a look around, Renbachian had a better understanding of the laboratory. At present, there were thousands of talents in this laboratory, and they could carry out multiple projects at the same time. There were also thousands of supporting staff, including guards, kitchen staff, and assistants. At present, it was one of the more advanced laboratories in the country. Most of the previous projects had already been completed, and they were ready to fully focus on the things that Rinpoche had brought over from the paradise. However, at present, they could only study some soil, a small flower, and a piece of rock. Most of them were idle. Very soon, Rinpoche met the person in charge of the laboratory. He was a white-haired old man who immediately asked Yongsen, "What did you bring this time?" "This is Elder Lu. He has done considerable research in biology, and is one of the people in charge of this laboratory," Yongsen introduced. "These two are Mr. Run and Madam Qi. Mr. Run has brought some things. The two of you are here for a checkup." Elder Lu's eyes lit up when he heard Yongsen's words. "This time, I'm here to study something else." Rinpoche shook his head slightly, and a sheathed knife appeared in his hand. "What's this?" Elder Lu stared at the knife and asked. Yongsen immediately thought of some legendary magic treasures and the like. Rinpoche drew the knife from the sheath, and before the two of them could see, he made a cut on his hand and let the blood drip onto the knife. After making a few cuts, it wouldn't hurt anymore. With a thought from Rinpoche, the knife in his hand suddenly grew from 1 foot to 2 feet. This shocked the two of them, and almost made them think that it was a switchblade. Following which, it became a 3-foot blade that completely grew out of the handle. This time, Yongsen's eyes immediately lit up. Rinpoche took out some ointment and applied it on his arm. In the blink of an eye, the wound began to close and tender flesh began to grow. This knife is called Changsheng. You have seen its function. It can grow after sucking blood, Rinpoche told the two of them. Elder Lu stared at Rinpoche's arm and asked, "What medicine is this?" "Black mud cream. I have a laboratory that is researching this, and it will be on the market soon," Rinpoche said faintly. Even so, Elder Lu was still very interested. Following which, he set his sights on the long knife in Rinpoche's hand and asked, "It can grow only by sucking blood? Can it become shorter?" With a move from Rinpoche, the Changsheng knife returned to its original size of 2 feet. It can be controlled with your mind. Furthermore, as time passes, the length will slowly return to its original size. "This thing can be controlled with your mind?" Elder Lu was suddenly shocked. Upon hearing this, Yongsen's eyes lit up like a searchlight, and his breathing became heavier. "Yes." Rinpoche briefly explained the situation of this Changsheng knife. "Let me try," Elder Lu said. First of all, this knife could grow. The metal that could grow already proved its value. Although Rinpoche said that it could absorb blood, the quality of the blood that flowed from Rinpoche and the part that grew from the knife was too different. It completely didn't conform to the law of conservation of mass. Needless to say, it could be controlled with one's mind. If the theory was researched, it would have a huge impact on the modern world. To put it simply, it could drive with a single thought and stop with a single thought. Or to put it in another way, it could be controlled with one's mind. The thoughts in one's mind could be input into the computer. Or to put it in another way, the so-called virtual world technology. There were also other aspects. Chapter 280. Elder Lu took the elongation saber and held his breath for a long time before asking in surprise, "Why isn't there any reaction? How can this be?" Rinpoche took the elongation saber back to his hand. It could grow or shrink according to his will, advance or retreat. "Let me try." Yongsen took it and held his breath for a long time while repeating, "Grow, grow." However, there was still no reaction after a long time. This time, everyone's gaze was somewhat strange. Rinpoche pondered whether it could only be used by people from another world. However, he was an earthling. He stuffed the elongation saber back into the Empress's hand to see if there were any changes. After a few seconds, the Empress raised her hand and threw the saber back to him. "Only you can use it. This thing has the ability to recognize its owner." Rinpoche was flabbergasted as he didn't expect this at all. Not only was Renbachian surprised, but everyone else was also surprised. What did it mean for it to recognize its owner? Was this saber compatible with Renbachian in some way? Or did this saber have its own thoughts? The former was like a key opening a lock, so how did Renbachian control this saber? As for the latter, was this saber alive? It seems like I'm the only one who can use this saber. I'll bring back the things you need in a few days. Renbachian sheathed the saber. Although this saber was a little useless, he still felt that it was pretty good that only he could use it. Leave this saber here first. We still need to conduct some tests. Elder Lu quickly grabbed Renbachian's arm. Although only Renbachian could use it, this saber had great research value. Renbachian thought for a while, and decided to let them study this saber to see if there were any secrets. Don't break it, or else you won't get anything else, Renbachian exhorted. Elder Lu held the saber and ran out to call for the researchers. He couldn't be bothered with Renbachian, who was left behind. His main goal now was to study the secrets of this saber. After leaving the saber here for the time being, Renbachian left with the Empress and returned to the haunted house in SY where several people died. At least, most people in that building thought that house was a haunted house. When Renbachian appeared in that neighborhood, a few people were stunned at first, then their expressions changed drastically. They quickly called the police after Renbachian left. Hello, 110? I saw the wanted murderer. A few policemen were stopped just as they were about to set off. After all, Renbachian's arrest warrant had already been revoked. However, these police officers had a deep impression of his case, especially that note. As soon as he heard the news, he was immediately furious and wanted to arrest him. Only after the reminder did he remember that the man was no longer a wanted criminal. Until now, many people did not understand. The case that person committed was almost irrefutable, and the impact was so big, so bad. How could the arrest warrant be cancelled? Take a look. The person who stopped them earlier threw over a piece of paper. On it was a notice of what had happened. In the notice, Renbachian became a member of a certain secret department, and the Jin family was involved in a series of cases. In fact, there was no need to issue this notice, but they were afraid that someone would cause trouble for Renbachian again. Based on what Renbachian had done in the past, he might not be able to stir up any trouble in the end. He might as well notify them. As long as he doesn't break the law in the future, don't bother with him, the policeman reiterated. Renbachian stood in front of the door and looked at the newly changed lock and the key in his hand. He was slightly speechless as he couldn't even return to his own home. After calling Chunshur and asking where the key to the new lock was, Renbachian opened the door. There was dust everywhere, and the living room was filled with shopping bags. All of them were bought in Milan previously. There was a layer of cloth covering them, and it looked like his bed sheets. He called the housekeeper, and the housekeeper was surprised to receive the call. Renbachian explained that he wasn't a wanted criminal, that it was a misunderstanding, and that he was actually a government employee. The housekeeper immediately promised to arrange for someone to clean up the house and bring a new contract. The Empress stood there and frowned slightly. As she flicked her sleeves, the dust in the living room seemed to be blown away by a storm. In an instant, nobody could see her. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the Empress instantly appeared outside the door, leaving Renbachian to be baptized by the dust storm. Cough cough. Renbachian covered his nose with one hand and looked as if he had just crawled out from a pile of coal. He turned his head and looked at the Empress. The Empress looked back at him with an innocent look on her face. After waiting for an hour, the person who promised to come immediately finally arrived. At this moment, the house was even dirtier than before. The walls and ceiling were covered in dust. As long as one raised their voice, the dust would fall from the top of their heads. After more than half an hour, Renbachian, who had taken a bath and changed his clothes, dragged the Empress to the supermarket to buy ingredients, sweets and wine. What's the matter? Renbachian looked at a young lady who suddenly blocked his way and asked. She was 27 or 28 years old, wearing a police coat, and had her hair tied into a ponytail. She looked very neat. The lady took out an identification card from her pocket and said, "Police. I'm just warning you not to offend me. Don't think that what you have done is over." If you think that I have done something wrong, you can arrest me. Renbachian stretched out both of his hands and smiled. He took a glance at the identification card, and it seemed that the person was called Lin Mu. However, my arrest warrant has already been cancelled, right? The others didn't come, and only you came. If it isn't because you have a strong sense of justice, then what relationship do you have with the Jean family? I can tell you that one of them was my aunt. What did she do? She had never hurt anyone, but she died in the hands of a murderer like you. Lin Mu gnashed his teeth and said, "The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. This was left behind by you, right? You are a murderer. You should be executed. Although I don't know what kind of background you have to cancel your arrest warrant, it doesn't mean that the previous incident is over." The Jean family has done so many things. Why didn't you arrest them? What wrong did the people who were killed by the Jean family do? Renbachian revealed a sarcastic smile. You seem to have a strong sense of justice, but in fact, you bully the weak and fear the strong. You might even be able to become a police officer because of your relationship with the Jean family. Therefore, why would you bother about them? In that case, do you want to take revenge now? Speaking up to this point, Renbachian slightly bent his body so that he could look straight into Lin Mu's eyes. He then said softly, "Take a guess, if you die, will anyone avenge you?" Lin Mu was so angry that his whole body trembled. "Do you really think that you can do whatever you want? You are threatening the police. Be careful, or I will arrest you now." Renbachian nodded seriously. "Yes, I can really do whatever I want." As soon as Renbachian's voice fell, he laughed. It was meaningless to provoke this self-righteous and crazy woman. He also didn't think that he could really do whatever he wanted. He was just provoking her a little. "It seems like you are the one who is threatening me, right? I forgot to mention that I am a civil servant, but you are not qualified to know my specific identity. What I do is a national secret. As for the previous question, you should ask the Jean family when they are still around. Can you really do whatever you want with money and power? I believe they will give you an answer." Renbachian smiled, turned around and pulled the Empress. They walked past the woman, leaving her gritting her teeth and standing in the same place. "You are very boring." The Empress was slightly dissatisfied. She actually wasted so much time on someone unrelated to her. I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Moreover, I hate such self-righteous people. Chapter 281. Renbachian didn't take the policewoman seriously, but after seeing her, Renbachian recalled the aftermath of the Jean family. After returning to the car, he gave Chinshur a call as he should be more familiar with the situation. After asking, he found out that the Jean family was in a mess after he escaped. Several of the main leaders were dead, and there were almost no immediate family members left. The remaining people fought fiercely for the property, especially the relatives of the Jean family. At that time, some people thought of avenging Jean 1 and the rest, but before they had the chance, the police exterminated the remaining members of the Jean family and dug up all the previous incidents. After all, the Jean family wasn't clean, and this incident was so serious that the old scores were immediately dug up. Of course, there were also some departments behind the scenes. After the call, Renbachian felt relieved and completely let go of this matter. The Jean family had already fallen apart and could no longer cause any trouble. For the next period of time, Renbachian had absolutely nothing to do. Occasionally, he would go to the school that was still under construction. The 3 brick houses had basically been completed. Sometimes, Renbachian would think of something and ask the person in charge to add a little something in a certain place. For example, a swing. For example, digging a ditch to bring in water from a nearby stream. For example, building a pavilion. The rest of the time he would practice or receive Tonglan's one-on-one tutoring. Every time he lay on the ground after being educated by Tonglan, he would always remember a man saying, "I'm invincible in my background music." However, Renbachian was exactly the opposite of him. "I've never won in my background music." Ah, what a painful realization. Traveling back and forth between the other world and Earth, his progress was still slow, but his strength had recently increased to more than 450 kilograms. At this time, Renbachian couldn't see the surrounding scenery clearly at the bottom of the lake, but he estimated that he shouldn't be far from the bottom. When he touched the bottom of the lake, he would have completed the cultivation of the visualization of water and reached the initial stage of the manual level. This was a qualitative change. When he reached the initial stage of the manual level, his entire body would undergo some changes, indicating that he had taken an important step. In Great Xia, only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could reach the manual level, and only 1 in 100 could reach the earthwill level. From this ratio, some problems could be explained. The manual level was an extremely important threshold. Early in the morning, Renbachian cleaned himself up and shaved his hair, revealing his green scalp. He also shaved his beard. He even took a cold shower. Then he picked up Gungun, who was hugging his thigh, and threw it to the side, causing it to collide with Tian Tian. Tian Tian and Gungun were sent to Pingle Park recently. Otherwise, Renbachian would have missed them. He simply informed the Empress and got someone to send them over. When he arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress was reading a thread-bound book. "Your Majesty, do you want to return with me? Have a taste of our new year and home-cooked meals." Renbachian stood beside her, leaned his upper body against the wooden couch, and moved closer to see what the Empress was looking at. "Are you going home?" The Empress straightened her body and asked. She then casually slapped the book on his body. "Yes." Renbachian nodded. It was time to go back. It had been so long. If not for the fact that the Empress was always by his side, he would have returned long ago. "I'm not going." The Empress immediately rejected him. Renbachian heaved a sigh of relief after hearing what the Empress said. After all, even though the Empress treated him well, she was still very cold to others. In addition, she had been in charge of life and death for a long time. Furthermore, she had the aura of a top-notch expert. Ordinary people would probably feel uneasy around her. Just by releasing a little bit of her aura, a vacuum zone would appear around her, and no one would appear around her. If he really brought the Empress back, he was afraid that there would be an awkward silence, and then an awkward silence. Therefore, Renbachian felt that this wasn't a good time. However, it was still up to the Empress to decide whether to go or not. It seemed like the Empress didn't want to see anyone else now. The solar furnace should have arrived at Mount Damo by now, right? Renbachian calculated that it had already been half a month. Even though it was a mirror type and had to be transported carefully, it should have arrived in half a month. According to the journey, it should have arrived yesterday, the Empress said. She had received the news previously. If they used the Yabbard to send the letter, they should have received it by today. After all, not only Renbachian and the Empress were concerned about this matter, but many people in the imperial court were also paying attention to it. This was a major event that could affect the entire Dayo. The people from the Ministry of Works, Ministry of Revenue, and Ministry of War were also waiting for the news. On Mount Damo, dozens of people were busy fixing concave mirrors on a huge shelf. A group of people surrounded them and watched the show from afar. "This thing can melt Mount Damo?" Gu Qiong, the supervisor of the iron mine at Mount Damo, and many of his subordinates looked at them busily. When he recalled what these people said last night, he was still in disbelief. "You will know in a while." The person who spoke was Tao Jiyuan from the Department of Ordnance. He followed them this time around. Regarding this solar furnace, he had naturally heard of it. Those who saw it with their own eyes that day often talked about it. He had also heard Feng Ho talk about it. He heard that it used the energy of the sun to melt steel. However, he wasn't very clear about the specifics. Following the busy craftsman, the mirrors were fixed on the shelf one by one, just like a jigsaw puzzle. After spending the entire morning, the mirrors on the shelf were finally installed. Dozens of people took out some flat mirrors and began to adjust the angles. Finally, all the mirrors reflected the sunlight onto the solar furnace, and then onto an area with a radius of half a meter on Mount Damo. Everyone focused their attention there, wanting to see what would happen. In less than a minute or two, they could see the mountain start to turn red smoke and then catch fire. 3 minutes later, The molten iron started to melt and flow down the mountain wall. It's done. The person who cheered was the leader of the craftsmen. His name was Pengze. Following which, the other craftsmen also cheered. After working for such a long time, there were finally no problems. On the other hand, the others were dumbfounded as they looked at the molten iron flowing down Mount Damo. They actually did it. Previously, the method of burning the mountain could increase the output of the iron mine by several times. With this thing, it wasn't just a few times, but more than 10 times, or even 100 times. Following which, the craftsmen prepared to install the second solar furnace. This time around, they brought enough concave mirrors to make 3 of these solar furnaces. At the same time, someone taught Guqiong how to adjust the angle of the mirrors and the angle of the shelf. This was taught by Renbaqian. After all, they couldn't just melt a single point. At the same time, there was also a metal box that was specially used to collect the molten iron. All they had to do was place it at the bottom. When the molten iron fell into the metal box, it would heat up the metal box, but it wouldn't melt. After all, the molten iron would cool down as it fell. Some of the molten iron would cool down and form wall hangings on the mountain wall. As for these newly formed wall hangings, as long as a hammer was used to smash them, they would fall. After 2 hours, the molten iron that flowed down and the iron pieces that fell and solidified on the mountain wall weighed about 500 kilograms. A solar furnace could be used for about 6 hours a day. At other times, due to the angle of the sun, the sunlight couldn't be reflected onto Mount Damo through the mirrors and the solar furnace. However, in just 3 hours, 1,500 kilograms of iron could be produced. 3 solar furnaces would be equivalent to 9,000 kilograms of iron. Excluding the rainy days, there would be at least 200 sunny days in a year. That was to say, Tao Jiyuan sat on the ground without a care for his image. He didn't have enough fingers to count and couldn't calculate for a long time. 8 million kilograms. When Tao Jiyuan finally came up with this number, his lips were trembling. This number really scared him. When the others heard it, they also started to tremble. Guqiong's face was flushed as if he had drunk too much. One had to know that Dayo's annual production of iron was only about 5,000 kilograms. Now with this solar furnace, the annual production of iron was equivalent to 100 years of iron production from Mount Damo and Mount Liutsue. This number was simply too terrifying. Furthermore, as long as there were enough manpower and solar energy, this number would continue to increase. Based on the production of a saber that weighed 20 kilograms, close to 100,000 sabers could be produced in a year. One had to know that for so many years, Dayo didn't have a 100,000 strong army. One of the main reasons was the lack of weapons. Among the commoners, a short saber could be regarded as a family heirloom. When this news reached the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of War, and the Ministry of Revenue, these few departments were about to explode. The loud noise could even be heard on the streets outside. Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan's wild laughter lasted for the time it took to burn a joss stick. Even though they had seen Renbaqian demonstrate the solar furnace, they didn't expect it to be so effective. That night, Tong Jinye from the Ministry of Works and Qin Chuan from the Ministry of War invited their subordinates to a banquet at House Yunyan. In the end, it turned into a decisive battle at the summit of a brothel. Tong Jinye had the last laugh again. When the Empress received this news, she was a little dazed at first. Soon after, she revealed a look of joy. At this rate, they could produce 200,000 weapons in 2 years. They didn't even need that many weapons. As long as they could produce 50,000 weapons, Dayo would have an additional 50,000 strong soldiers. 30,000 of them would be transferred to the Protectorate of the North, and the remaining 20,000 to the Protectorate of the Southeast and Protectorate of the Northeast. At that time, even if Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chen nation launched an attack together, she wouldn't need to worry. The Empress was excited. She stood up and walked a few steps in the hall. However, she remembered that the person who could share this joy with her wasn't here at this moment. At this moment, Renbaqian didn't know about this. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't be as happy as the others. An annual production of 1.8 million kilograms was only 1,800 tons. which was about the same as the annual steel production of the Tang dynasty. One had to know that the annual steel production of China on Earth was 1 billion tons. 1,800 tons wasn't even enough to meet the steel consumption of a small city. However, this was already a huge improvement for Dayo. At the very least, in terms of weapons, they would have sufficient stocks and wouldn't be controlled by others anymore. Chapter 282. Rinpoche parked his car in the neighborhood and stared blankly for a long time. It was impossible for one to be afraid of homesickness. However, after escaping and coming back, there were still some feelings. At this time, there were many children setting off firecrackers. There were also people pasting couplets and hanging lanterns. Although the atmosphere of the new year had been fading over the years, the atmosphere in this neighborhood was still quite strong, perhaps because there were many old people. Not long after, Rinpoche's cell phone rang. Just as he answered the call, he heard his father shouting, "Why are you still in a daze? Is your girlfriend here?" Rinpoche's parents were extremely concerned about the woman who was by his side even when he was on the run. No, Rinpoche had only said one word when he was interrupted by his father. "In that case, quickly come up and help me paste the couplets." Rinpoche looked up and saw a figure flash past the window. It seemed that his father had been waiting there all along. Rinpoche got out of the car, took out his things, and carried them upstairs. Before he could knock, his father opened the door and stood up to let him in. Mama Rin hurriedly came over and sized him up. "You have become much darker. Did you suffer much?" Speaking of suffering, Rinpoche was full of bitter tears. He felt that he had suffered a lot. For example, he was beaten up by the little loli with one hand, beaten up by the little loli with both hands, and beaten up by the little loli. In any case, he was beaten up once every 2 days. In addition, he would occasionally get punched in the chest by the Empress's small fists, which seriously injured him. It was indeed bitter. At present, Rinpoche was almost certain that his first serious injury was also caused by the Empress. It was just that he couldn't figure out why. As for the darkness, it would be strange if the sun in Dayo wasn't scorching hot. Putting down the things, he spread his hands and said, "Look at my face. Do I look like I suffered? It's mainly because I've been sightseeing in Europe, so it's a good opportunity to go out and see the scenery outside." "You have gained a lot of weight. How many kilograms are you now?" Papa Rin asked casually after sizing him up. 160. Recently, Rinpoche's physique had been going up in a straight line. He looked fine wearing thick clothes now, but after taking them off, his entire body was full of muscles. "In the past, I ate every day at home and didn't gain weight. Now that I've gone out for a walk, I've gained weight." Mama Ren complained about how Rinpoche didn't gain weight at home, but gained weight after going out for a walk. There's a lot of junk food in Europe and America, and there are all kinds of high-calorie foods. Fortunately, I've been training every day recently, otherwise I wouldn't be like this. You still have the cheek to talk about training. You still have the mood to train? Do you know how worried we were? As Mama Rin spoke, she poked Rinpoche's forehead with her one young finger. "I'm helping the country with some things," Rinpoche added. "I'm a civil servant now." Rinpoche and Rinpoche were surprised. "I can be considered a staff member of a certain department. There's no danger, and I'm in charge of some simple tasks," Rinpoche said. "What about your business?" "It doesn't matter. This civil servant is actually a part-time job. It's just an identity. There is such a thing." Papa Run and Mama Run felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. In many places, people would fight to become civil servants. How could Rinpoche still have a part-time job? "I brought something back for you this time." Rinpoche opened his bag and took out a wooden box. "This is a product that our company is going to launch soon. It's called Black Jade Reconnection Ointment. If you suffer from external injuries, just apply a little of it, and you'll be healed immediately." "Bah!" Mama Ren spat. "I've also read Jin Yong's new works. Kid, your words are getting more and more out of hand." Rinpoche thought about it, and decided not to tell his mother that Jin Yong and Jin Yongshin were two different people. Speaking of which, Jin Yongxin was also quite amazing. As long as he wrote a book, it would be written by Jin Yong. The name of the medicine hasn't been decided yet, but the effect is real. As for external injuries, just apply this on them, and they won't even leave a scar. Keep it well. Ren Baqian placed the small box on the table. The rest are clothes for you and your parents. Try them on when you have time. Aren't we going to put up couplets? Work first. Where did Wanyan go? Ren Baqian asked curiously. Why wasn't Wanyan home on New Year's Eve? He seems to have gotten a girlfriend. She's his high school classmate. I reckon that they are already together. Mama Ren said somewhat discontentedly. In her opinion, it was still too early for a freshman to fall in love. Not bad. Otherwise, all the good cabbages would have been eaten by pigs. Ren Baqian nodded. Then he suffered another blow from the six-pulse divine sword. If you didn't mention it, I almost forgot to ask. What's the name of your girlfriend? Where did he come from? You didn't invite her? Mama Ren's face immediately lit up. I'm from another city, and I'm celebrating the new year. Ren Baqian waved his hand. What's her name? What's her job? Why was she around when you were in Europe? Mama Ren still wouldn't let him off. Her surname is Qi, and her name is Zixiao. She's a civil servant, and is considered my superior. Don't I have a part-time job? That's it. Ren Baqian managed to deal with all his mother's questions with great difficulty, and went to the corridor with his father to put up couplets and the word fu. It was past 2 in the afternoon when Ren Baqian returned. Ren Baqian was sitting on the sofa and chatting with his father. He was talking about his experiences in Europe, and of course, omitted many inappropriate things for children. For example, he made a lot of sakuma that was drenched in ketchup. According to him, this trip was basically a sightseeing tour. Of course, the truth was almost the same. During dinner, Papa Ren and Mama Ren asked a bunch of questions about his girlfriend, such as her birth date, family situation, and so on. This made Ren Baqian's head hurt. 8 characters of birth. How could there be 8 characters of birth in that world? His grandfather was the founding emperor and was obsessed with cultivation. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. His father was the late emperor who was obsessed with cultivation and went missing after getting seriously injured. Could he say this? Would you believe it if I said it? The family celebrated the new year together. The next day, Ren Baqian started to walk the streets and visit his relatives and friends. After his accident, his relatives were really nice. Nothing melodramatic happened. Instead, they helped Papa Ren and Mama Ren gather a lot of information. It was reasonable for Ren Baqian to visit them and mention his identity as a civil servant at the same time. This made his family feel that he was similar to 007. After all, he carried the lives of more than 10 people and returned half a year later as if nothing had happened. This made it hard for people to doubt his words. For ordinary people, Ren Baqian was considered a legend. Ren Baqian didn't comment on this. If he revealed his girlfriend, he could engrave the word legend on his forehead. He didn't need to reveal it because Mama Ren helped him reveal it. Now that Ren Baqian was successful in his business and had become a civil servant with 5 insurances and 1 housing fund, there were many people who wanted to introduce him to a marriage partner. Mama Ren then showed the photo that he had posted on his WeChat moments to everyone, but there was no response. Brother. Ren Wanyan sneaked up to Ren Baqian. Sister-in-law, do you have a younger sister? No, get lost. Ren Baqian slapped the back of his head. Chapter 283. Ren Baqian stayed at home for a few days, enjoyed his family's affection, and received all kinds of gazes. Then he returned to Dayo. After changing his clothes, Ren Baqian carried a bag to Yangxin Palace Hall. The bag contained the dumplings, braised pork, and eggplant boxes that Ren Baqian's mother gave him. The Empress was curled up on the sofa watching Qin Yunji with a tomato-flavored potato chip in her hand. Seeing that Ren Baqian had returned, the Empress glanced at him indifferently, ignored him, and focused on watching the television series. Your Majesty, I brought you some dumplings. They were made at home, and I insisted on bringing them to you. Renbaqian lifted the bag in his hand. He took a look behind the Empress, pointed at the main character on the screen, and said, "I always felt that men look ugly like this, and they are almost the same as women." The Empress glanced at Renbaqian, looked at the gigolo on the screen, and ignored him. Although the one in the television series was indeed similar to a woman. However, Renbaqian wasn't much better. He was just a little stronger now. When Renbaqian first arrived, he was also thin and weak. His waist wasn't even as thick as a human's arm. As for his appearance, there was no need to talk about it. Mount Damo has installed solar furnaces. With 3 solar furnaces, they can produce 3,000 kilograms of iron a day. The Empress thought for a while and told Renbaqian this good news. Even though a day had passed, she still felt happy. And Renbaqian was the one who could share this joy with her. They did a good job. Renbaqian's face revealed a happy expression. Although it was much worse than the modern world, it was already a good start with Dayo's foundation. With the remaining iron, he could also make other things. For example, steam engines. Renbaqian and the Empress curled up on the sofa, each sitting at one end. Their actions were surprisingly identical, and they were hugging their legs. The Empress realized that he was copying her, so she quietly picked up a potato chip and threw it at his face. After being seriously injured previously, the two of them consciously kept some distance between each other. Renbaqian was really too weak to be hurt. A light blow could seriously injure him. He was no different from tofu residue. However, this kind of small action was much more natural. Both of them felt that it was pretty good. From the next day onwards, Renbaqian resumed his normal life, practicing martial arts, getting beaten up, and at the same time, preparing to teach the students. After all, the day was approaching. In another 3 weeks, Dayo's new year would be over, and it would be time for the students to report for duty. While preparing the teaching materials, Renbaqian realized that being a teacher wasn't an easy task. The students in Dayo were different from when he was young. At that time, he had no other choice. Everyone else also learned the same things, and went through layers of examinations to enter university. Furthermore, these things were still new to Dayo. They needed to be interesting and attractive to Dayo in order to do so. For the time being, Renbaqian's courses were Chinese, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. Among them, language was still easy. The main thing was literacy. Simplified Chinese characters. He was ready to spread simplified Chinese characters to this world. Mathematics was a necessity. Adding and subtracting with less than 2 digits required one to break one's fingers. Anything with more than 2 digits required one to guess. This was a common situation among the Aboriginal commoners. The officials were not much better off. They could do simple addition and subtraction, but if it was slightly more complicated, they would have to scratch their heads. Only the people from the Ministry of Revenue had mastered the multiplication and division of 2-digit numbers. There was almost no foundation in physical chemistry in this world. For example, when you hit a rock, your fist would hurt. Everyone knew this. If one were to ask why, it was simply nonsense. After all, a rock was harder than a fist. These were all reasons that should be taken for granted. He had not even considered the deeper effects of power, let alone others. If they wanted to build Dayo into a well-off imperialist society with Dayo's characteristics, it would not be possible without these foundations. No matter how strong one was, he could only destroy and not use it to build. Except for brick moving. Dayo had tens of millions of god-level brick-moving workers who could carry hundreds of kilograms of bricks, as if they were flying. At this moment, Renbaqian was surrounded by darkness. He could only see a little bit of light when he raised his head. He was completely surrounded by water. The huge pressure almost kneaded Renbaqian together. Every inch of his body was under tremendous pressure. The last bit of air in his lungs was squeezed out. Renbaqian knew that he was going back soon. However, he still tried his best to dive down, even if it was just a little bit. At this moment, his fingertips seemed to have touched something, causing his body to tremble. The lake was dead silent. There wasn't even a single water plant. It had been a few months since he touched something in the water. Could it be that I have touched the bottom of the lake? Renbaqian was ecstatic. Did touching the bottom of the lake mean that he had finally reached the threshold of the manual level? However, his strength had also dissipated. His vision started to turn black. Soon after, he returned to the real world and felt extremely tired. After waking up, Renbachian felt his body and didn't seem to have changed much. At this moment, his strength was about 250 kilograms, which was achieved bit by bit during this period of time. Other than that, his strength and speed didn't change much from yesterday. Have I reached the manual level? Renbachian wasn't too sure. He went out of the house and asked someone to prepare a medicinal bath. After soaking in the medicinal bath, he was still pondering. The manual level was a barrier, and there should be some changes after he passed it. It seemed that he hadn't reached the manual level yet. In that case, he would have to wait until he practiced at night. After soaking in the medicinal bath, Renbachian left the palace with the guards and went straight to the glass factory. At this time, the end of the year was approaching, and there were a lot more people in Lawn City. Many men and women wearing animal skins bought some salt, cloth, and other things in Lawn City, and brought them back to the village. They also brought a lot of furs and other things when they went down the mountain. Many of them simply tied up the wild beasts and carried them over. Renbachian saw a sharp-toothed tiger tied up and hung on a tree trunk. 2 people carried it, one in front and one behind, into the city. In addition, there were many other things such as strange horns, birds in cages, and other things that Renbachian had never seen before. They could only be found deep in the mountains. Renbachian brought the ox rider and ran all the way to the glass factory. Under Jiao's lead, they entered a house. Inside, there were neatly stacked wooden boxes that emitted a fragrant smell of wood. He went forward and opened one of the boxes. Inside, there were crystal-clear glass cups. Every 2 cups were filled with hay to prevent them from being damaged during transportation. Renbachian was used to seeing glass products and didn't think much of it. However, when Jiaozhua looked at these cups, his face was filled with pride. These were made by him and those craftsmen. After that, Renbachian went to the side and opened another box. Inside, there were many vertical silver mirrors. They were basically round and inlaid in a wooden disc. Renbachian examined them carefully and nodded his head in satisfaction. These were the goods that would be sent to the other 3 countries after a period of time. At present, if the gold, silver, and gemstones in the palace's treasury were exchanged for medicine, they could support him for 3 months at most. Although there would be a batch of gold and silver being sent to the palace at the end of the year. However, these gold and silver were the expenses of the palace next year, including the salaries of the palace guards, palace maids, the imperial concubines, and the daily expenses of the Empress. Therefore, what Renbachian needed for his future training would depend on this batch of goods. At this time, it was close to the new year. The 2 caravans that belonged to the imperial family had already returned. When they left after the new year, they would bring these goods to the other countries and let them spit out some of the profits that they had previously earned in Dayo. The craftsmen will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver each. The apprentices and handymen will be rewarded with 3 taels each. And you will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. You will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. I will get someone to send the money over later. Everyone will have a fat new year, Renbachian said faintly as he closed the box and left. Sir is wise. It is our fortune to be able to work under you, Jiaozhua quickly said. Chapter 284. That night, Renbachian entered the visualization of water again. It was still a lifeless lake with a faint mist and a few small trees. Renbachian couldn't wait and dived into the lake. He swam to the center of the lake and dived down. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. The water pressure was getting stronger, and the surrounding optical fibers were getting dimmer and dimmer. However, Renbachian's condition today was better than yesterday. His heart was burning with passion. When his fingers touched the object below again, there was still a little bit of air left in Renbachian's lungs. According to his experience, he could hold on for another 10 seconds or so. These days, he was very familiar with the condition of his body when he dived down. Due to the lack of oxygen in his lungs, Renbachian started to feel a burning pain. He focused all his attention on his hands and touched his surroundings. It wasn't mud as he expected, but a stone-like bottom. At the same time, one of his hands touched something protruding out. When he wanted to carefully identify what it was, he suddenly woke up and felt tired all over. What a pity, just a little bit more, Renbachian thought. But just a little bit more. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Renbachian waved his fist, but he didn't have any energy and went straight to sleep. The next day, Renbachian dived to the bottom of the lake again to look for the object he touched last night. This time he finally touched it. It was something that looked like a stone ring. When he woke up from the visualization of water, he was somewhat unwilling. He was just a little bit away. That stone ring should be pulled off, right? Could it be pulled off? Was there something below? Renbachian thought to himself. There was no record of this in the Rui visualization. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Renbachian lay on the bed and waved his arms. On the third day, Renbachian withdrew from the visualization of water, again with a trace of unwillingness on his face. I can definitely do it tomorrow. On the fourth day, Renbachian withdrew from the visualization of water and lay on the bed. Damn it. On the fifth day, Renbachian cursed, F***ck. There wasn't much progress over the past 5 days. Even Renbachian had some doubts about whether his method was wrong. However, in the end, Renbachian carefully thought about the Rui visualization that he was practicing. This visualization of water, from the start, was to absorb the effects of medicine and change his body little by little. Besides increasing his strength, his stamina was much better than before. For example, even if he walked for a few hours, he would not feel tired at all. His daily visualization of water dive to the bottom of the lake was to put pressure on his body on the consciousness level. At the same time, it affected his external body and unearthed his body's potential. This was the process of his body absorbing the medicinal effects. From the beginning, the visualization of water had always been used for this purpose. Then, that Shirhuan definitely wasn't playing some puzzle-solving game with him. Instead, it was the same as before, trying to squeeze him dry so that he could unearth his body's potential. Now that he was at the bottom of the lake, what he needed to do was to pull up the stone chains. At the thought of this, Renbachian made up his mind. If one day wasn't enough, then 2. One day he would be able to pull up that stone ring. After a few more days, Renbachian returned from Earth and took another medicinal bath. He pulled the stone hoop again, and after using all his strength, he finally felt as if he could pull it up a little. This made him overjoyed. He knew that he had done the right thing. The stone slab under the stone ring was pulled up a little. There seemed to be a door there. Another day passed. On this day, Renbachian was lying on his bed practicing the visualization of water. His originally calm body suddenly trembled. 2 streams of heat flowed from his kidneys and began to circulate throughout his body. Wherever the 2 streams of heat flowed, his blood vessels and veins bulged. His muscles also bulged as if there was something swimming under his muscles. As the heat flowed through his body, Renbachian's body heated up and turned red at the same time. It was as if he was having a high fever. His body temperature quickly rose to 40 degrees Celsius. However, all his sweat pores were tightly shut, and the heat could not be discharged along with his sweat. After a while, Renbachian's head began to emit a steam-like gas, just like a large kettle. If this was seen by someone on Earth, they would probably think that they were witnessing the legendary 3 flowers at the crown and 5 cheese toward the origin. After a long time, the white gas on Renbachian's head began to decrease, and his body temperature also dropped. At this moment, Renbachian slowly woke up. He had just woken up, but he did not feel the feeling of breaking through a bottleneck or advancing in his cultivation. His whole body felt exhausted, thirsty, and tired. His mind was not very clear, and he only wanted to have a good sleep. He struggled to get up and drank 3 cups of water before falling into a deep sleep on the bed. Renbachian was woken up by hunger. He could not see the exact time, but the sky was not bright yet. His stomach felt like it was on fire, and every cell in his body was screaming for hunger. He got up from the bed, ran out of the room at lightning speed, picked up a bamboo shoot that was prepared for Tian Tian and Gun Gun, and started to chew on it. The two little chaps were woken up by him. When they realized that he was secretly eating their bamboo shoots, they staggered forward and wanted to snatch it back. However, Run Baqian's eyes were glowing green. He even had the intention to roast these two chaps. When he saw them, he could smell the smell of meat. Sir Rin. The guards outside were alarmed by the noise inside. They came in to check and found Ren Baqian squatting there. His eyes were glowing green, and he looked terrifying. Quick, bring me to the imperial kitchen. I am going to starve to death. Ren Baqian had already finished his second bamboo shoot, but his stomach did not feel any better. He knew what he needed. Meat, a lot of meat. When they arrived at the imperial kitchen, Ren Baqian did not see any leftovers. Regardless of whether it was vegetables or meat, they were all raw. He chewed on the fruits while getting someone to start the fire and stew the meat. After struggling for 3 hours, Ren Baqian ate 2 pots of meat consecutively, which weighed about 15 to 20 kilograms, before the feeling of hunger finally subsided. Ren Baqian leaned against the wall and sat on the ground. He really wanted to curse in his heart. The last time he encountered such a situation, it was the same for this breakthrough. The next time he broke through, he must prepare food first. At least, he had to prepare a few kilograms of braised beef. Otherwise, the feeling of hunger from head to toe wasn't something an ordinary person could endure. After resting, Ren Baqian picked his teeth while strolling back to Pingle Park. The sky was already bright. At this moment, Ren Baqian felt a little uncomfortable. It was as if his body was a lot more relaxed. His legs were light, and walking was almost like a moonwalk. When he returned to Pingle Park, he tried running 10 meters in an instant. His speed was much faster than before. If he needed around 13 seconds to run 100 meters previously, he only needed around 8 to 9 seconds now. However, he still felt as if he was not exerting his strength. The sudden change in his body made it difficult for him to control it. At the same time, the speed of his punches had increased a lot. This was especially true for his strength. When Ren Baqian returned to Pingle Park and played with the stone dumbbell, his strength had increased by at least 50 kilograms. This meant that he now had more than 600 kilograms of strength. As for his jumping ability, this was the biggest improvement. He was able to jump up a 2-meter-tall wall with just one step. Ren Baqian clenched his fists with a face full of joy. This breakthrough had actually improved his body so much. Following which, he asked the guards to help him test out other aspects of his abilities. He realized that his dynamic vision and reaction time were much faster than before. For example, when he was fighting with Tong Lan previously, he couldn't see her movements clearly. Even if he could see them occasionally, his body couldn't react in time. After the test, Ren Baqian was excited for the whole day. He had finally advanced to the manual level and could be considered a practitioner. Furthermore, his strength had improved a lot. Even though his strength had only increased from 250 kilograms to 600 kilograms, the result of this increase of 100 kilograms was crushing. Needless to say, his speed had increased by 40%, his jumping ability had doubled, and his dynamic vision and reaction time had increased by 30%. If he were to compare his current strength with that of a day ago, Ren Baqian felt that he could fight against 3 people effortlessly. A difference of 30% to 40% wasn't considered big, but in fact, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. If he were to fight with his previous self, he would be able to see the movements that he couldn't see clearly previously. He could now dodge the attacks that he couldn't dodge previously. On the other hand, Tong Lan's perspective was the exact opposite. Ren Baqian had an excited smile on his face all the way until he stood with Tong Lan at the training ground in the afternoon. First, he played the background music for himself. Theme. As the majestic music sounded, it was as if the prologue of a smoky battlefield had begun. Ren Baqian's blood was boiling. After being beaten up by the little Lolita for so long, he could finally take revenge today. He could finally rise up. Even if he still wasn't her match, he wanted to give her a scare. Sir Tong. Ren Baqian suddenly put away his previous expression and smiled at the person behind the little Lolita. Then he lowered his body and rushed toward Tonglan like a leopard. His first move was a series of punches. The little Lolita was startled by his sudden increase in speed, and was indeed caught unprepared. However, it was only for a moment. Bang! Renbachian flew out in an arc and landed heavily on the ground. Sigh, such is life. Renbachian lay on the ground, looked at the azure sky, and let out a faint sigh. Your strength has improved. The little Lolita was surprised. Renbachian actually improved so much today compared to the day before yesterday. He actually improved from lying down after 2 moves to lying down after 4 moves, which was a full improvement. Renbachian opened his mouth and blew a bubble. No matter what, he had already advanced from a level 2 rookie to a level 3 rookie. Furthermore, he discovered a problem during this exchange. His ability to withstand blows had also improved. Previously, when Tonglan's fists hit his body, it was still very painful. But now, it was only slightly painful and much less painful than before. Tonglan controlled her strength very well, and had always used the same amount of strength. In other words, his ability to withstand blows had also improved by a lot. Previously, he was seriously injured by the Empress's small fists, and was on the verge of death. The current him should only be seriously injured. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.